May recess the committee at any point. Good morning. The Committee on Education and Workforce has been instrumental in exposing the anti-Semitism that has infected. I hate using that term, but it's true. Infected our nation's oldest and best-known institutions of higher education. Schools like Harvard and Columbia, Northwestern. We've held and will continue to hold these universities accountable as they choose to stand idly by rather than meaningfully addressing the harassment and the discrimination against Jewish students on their campuses. But as we'll see today, the scourge of anti-Semitism has taken root far beyond the country's best-known ivory towers. And it's our responsibility as a committee to unearth and address anti-Semitism at these schools too, and others, especially as anti-Semitism is at a historic high in the United States. Anti-Semitism is proliferating at colleges across the country, both private, public, rural, urban, and suburban settings. What does anti-Semitism look like? It manifests in faculty who create a hostile environment on campus, of all places, by expressing support for known terrorist groups, verbally harass Jewish students, and call for the destruction of Israel. It manifests itself in students who lob anti-Semitic slurs at Jewish students and display signs glorifying violence against Jews while cowardly shielding their own identity behind masks. It manifests itself in organizations like Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine, Students for Justice in Palestine, and American Muslims for Palestine, which all support this infrastructure of hate. It manifests itself in administrators, some of whom appear anti-Semitic themselves, while others are complicit in creating a hostile environment through their indifference to the harassment of Jewish students. We'll hear today about anti-Semitism at three institutions: Haverford College, DePaul University, and California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. The incidents we'll be discussing with our witnesses today are truly appalling and shameful. Take Haverford, for instance, a small liberal arts college located in suburbs outside Philadelphia. From the time of October 7th, 2023, terrorist attack in Israel to the present, the Haverford administration has consistently refused to act against severe anti-Semitic harassments on campus. It has refused to even condemn these incidents of harassment or hostility in a clear, unequivocal statement, much less meaningfully discipline the students responsible for these incidents. Instead, the university has exhibited an all-consuming commitment to dialogue, even when that dialogue is dominated by anti-Semitic conspiracy theories or calls to violence. What's more, Haverford employs faculty members who engage in blatant anti-Semitism with no apparent consequences. For example, one professor declared online that Zionism is Nazism. The Haverford administration's failure to address anti-Semitism on campus is taking a painful toll on students, faculty, and staff. Without objection, I'd like to enter into the record a letter from Haverford's Shabbat House that was sent just yesterday afternoon, to the Haverford Board of Managers. The letter says, under this administration, Jewish students have been marginalized, ostracized, and at times outright attacked. Meanwhile, their pain has been met with indifference, end quote. I also was caught with their early statement in the letter where it says, we've never spoken out against the college. We've never publicly criticized its leadership. We've simply tried to serve, to support Haverford and its students in every way we could, but today we can no longer remain silent. I submit this for the record, and without objection, it's submitted. At DePaul, meanwhile, there have been multiple instances of fiscal violence against Jewish students. Last May, the university permitted a multi-week encampment that was so disruptive and violent that the nearby elementary school had to cancel recess. After finally forcibly shutting down the encampment, DePaul still ended up giving in to agitators' demands. We have a student here today who had surgery as a result of the attack on him and a colleague. And at Cal Poly, at least one faculty member has been complicit in harassing Jewish students who were trying to attend an Israel-related special lecture. My colleagues and I are committed to holding these three universities and others accountable for perpetuating anti-Semitism. We're committed to enacting policies that create a safe environment for Jewish students, one in which faculty, staff, and administrators are held accountable for the anti-Semitism that consumes their campuses. I look forward to hearing your testimony today, as it will certainly inform this committee's future work. With that, I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being with us today. The month of May marks Jewish Heritage Month. It's when we celebrate the generations of Jewish Americans who've made incredible contributions to this country. This month, we reaffirm our commitment to combat the rise of anti-Semitism, both on and off college campuses. No one should be discriminated against because of who they are or how they worship. And all students have the right to learn in a safe environment free from discrimination in compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Unfortunately, instead of properly enforcing Title VI, this committee is holding the 8th hearing describing the problem and complaining about anti-Semitism on college campuses instead of taking any meaningful action to actually solve the problem. Curiously, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have not had any hearings addressing other forms of discrimination and hate, such as racism, Title IX gender violations, Islamophobia, homophobia, or the challenges of meeting the needs of students with disabilities. And this is particularly concerning since we know from reports from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights that on January 11th of last year, there were 12,000 open cases alleging discrimination and violation of Title VI. 12,000. And of those 12,000 cases, only 144 could be Title VI violations involving anti-Semitism. And we know the solution of this problem is better enforcement of Title VI. So instead of holding another hearing talking about the problem, which complains about the problem, we ought to be holding a hearing on what is going on in the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, the Department of Education. This administration is in the process of dismantling the Office of Civil Rights, and it raises reasonable doubt about the plans for addressing anti-Semitism on campus, as well as racism, homophobia, sexism, Islamophobia, or the needs of students with disabilities. Again, we should be focused on trying to solve the problem rather than just complaining about it. For centuries, college campuses have served as centers for debate and discussion on polarizing issues in our country. Unfortunately, this also means that they can become flashpoints for controversy. But it is fundamental for us to understand that we must protect student safety while also fostering college campuses as a place of learning where difficult topics can be discussed civilly without fear of retribution. OCR has typically and historically played a vital role in preserving that balance. When a suspected incidence of discrimination occurs on college campuses, OCR can investigate the claim. And when I say investigate, you've produced a letter from Jewish students on campus. The administration has letters from Jewish students on campus. Nice to have an investigation to find out what the facts are. But the OCR can investigate the claim, and there's an established process. Should an institution be found to violate its duty to provide a safe learning environment, OCR's process to work with the school will allow it to address the harm. Specifically, the institution is expected to take appropriate action to, quote, end the harassment, eliminate the hostile environment, prevent its reoccurrence, and address its effect as appropriate. And if this does not happen, the Department of Education can begin to withhold funds from the part of the institution which is in violation. However, in its first 3 months, the Trump administration has closed out 7 of 12 OCR regional offices, all of which conduct investigations into discrimination, and all of which conduct investigations into discrimination on campus, whether based on anti-Semitism or race, national origin, gender, or disability. According to public reports, nearly half of the OCR staff has been laid off, and so one is left to wonder, how can OCR carry out its important responsibilities with half the staff? My concerns have been confirmed by other reporting of students struggling to get assistance with ongoing cases because their attorney has been laid off. Moreover, instead of conducting investigations according with the law, the Trump administration has taken a sledgehammer to due process rights of institutions. But the public has seen a barrage of reports of this administration taking action without any investigation, such as taking away federal funding, students and professors having their international visas revoked, students who have been disappeared into detention centers, and threats to revoke tax-exempt status of multiple universities. Schools are also told to accept a list of the administration's demand, all without OCR first conducting a fact-finding investigation. In short, that is not due process. For some of us, this doesn't come as a surprise. After all, just this past weekend, the president appeared on NBC News and was asked whether he believes that he should uphold the Constitution, and he responded, "I don't know." Of course, one cannot forget that this is also the same president who thought there were, quote, very fine people on both sides after white supremacists marched through Charlottesville in 2017 chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And what everyone, including people you may disagree with, everyone is entitled to due process, and all students should be able to seek recourse if they've been discriminated against. Similarly, institutions should be given a chance to address the harms on their campus without fear of political retribution. And perhaps we should be proactive and utilize agencies in federal government like the Community Relations Services at the Department of Justice, which can serve as a peacemaker when there are problems in communities. Of course, regrettably, the Community Relations Service is on the chopping block right now at the Department of Justice. So we hope we can have a productive conversation today, that the centers of students and higher education, but hopefully one day we will begin having a hearing on solutions rather than continuing to complain about the problem. Now, before I yield back, when I said 12,000, that's the cases, total cases in the backlog, not the total number of cases. But the point, obviously, is that the number of anti-Semitism cases of all of the cases is a very small number, and if we're going to investigate Title VI violations, we ought to be investigating all of them, and we ought to be looking at what is going on at OCR, because that will be ultimately the solution to the problem. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I'll now turn to the introduction of our four witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Wendy Raymond, the president of Haverford College in Haverford, Pennsylvania. Welcome. Our second witness is Dr. Robert Manuel, the president of DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome. Our third witness is Mr. David Cole, the George J. Mitchell Professor in Law and Public Policy at the Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. Mr. Cole was formerly the National Legal Director for the American Civil Liberties Union. Welcome. Our last witness is Dr. Jeffrey Armstrong, the president of California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. We thank the witnesses for being here today. Pursuant to the committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. The clock will count down from 3 minutes, as committee members have been many questions for you, and we would like to spend as much time as possible on questions. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D, the committee practice, however, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the committee. I'll first recognize Dr. Raymond for your testimony.
Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Before I begin, I want to make it clear that Haverford condemns, in the strongest possible terms, anti-Semitism in all its forms. Haverford College is a liberal arts college outside Philadelphia, with about 1,500 undergraduate students. It's been a privilege to serve as president for the last 6 years. We are a secular institution established in 1833 by a group of Quakers. That Quaker history is one of the many qualities that make Haverford the distinctive place it is today. Small and close-knit, the college encourages and values open inquiry and free expression, core tenets of academic freedom. Education here is grounded in the Quaker assumption that intellectual and ethical growth are never complete. In the past few years, we have been tested like never before. The horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel caused unfathomable pain on our campus and around the world. Moreover, the ongoing war and loss of innocent lives in Israel and Gaza have left many shaken. In the wake of these events, we've seen a troubling rise in anti-Semitism in our communities and on our campuses. In the days following the attacks, I was inspired by how the Haverford community came together. At the same time, events have occurred on our campus that are inconsistent with our values. I take these incidents and Haverford's response very seriously. We have taken significant steps to address these issues and strengthen our policies. That includes updating our policies, strengthening campus safety programs, deepening engagement with the Jewish community, launching programs to combat anti-Semitism, and forming our ad hoc committee on free expression. I recognize that we haven't always succeeded in living up to our ideals. Many have wished that the college, or I as president, had responded differently to various actions. And we continue to make progress and invest in the quality of the campus experience for all Haverford students. In closing, I would like to address the Haverford community directly. You are the ones pushing us to be better. I hear you and acknowledge that we can do better, and I can do better. And to our Jewish students, some of you who are here today, I wish to make it unmistakably clear that you are valued members of our community and on our campus. I am sorry that my actions and my leadership let you down. I remain committed to addressing anti-Semitism and all issues that harm our community members. I am committed to getting this right. This is an unprecedented time in our college's history. and I continue to believe in the Haverford community. I thank you for demonstrating how, together, we can work toward creating a better and more peaceful world. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, President Raymond. And now, Dr. Manuel, we recognize you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss DePaul's efforts to combat anti-Semitism and keep our campus safe. For more than 125 years, DePaul's Catholic Vincentian mission has been grounded in the belief that every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth, a belief that compels us to stand firmly against anti-Semitism in all its forms. Since the terrorist attacks by Hamas on October 7th, we've taken strong steps to support our Jewish community members, prioritizing campus safety and student well-being. We've made mistakes along the way. As DePaul's leader, I want to acknowledge that openly. To our students, our parents, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, and our friends, I am deeply sorry. I know there are areas where we must and will do better. I also wish to speak directly to two of our students who were attacked last November. What happened to them was a hate crime. No one should ever be attacked because of who they are, and I am sorry for the pain that they're experiencing. For the past year and a half, we have taken concrete steps to ensure Jewish students and all students are safe on our campus. For example, we've just implemented a new ID verification and mask policy. We've introduced new limits on campus protests through our time, place, and manner restrictions, and we've enforced them. The operations for Students for Justice in Palestine are currently suspended from campus, and we banned a group, not a student group, behind enemy lines from our campus. We've hired a former ADL professional to assist in our Jewish engagement on campus. We've created a dedicated task force on anti-Semitism. We've supported the creation of the Jewish Faculty Staff Alliance, and now we're also launching a Jewish alumni group. We've also made substantial investments to increase security and safety across our urban Chicago campuses, and I've commissioned an external review of our security programs to improve campus safety. As an institution founded on Catholic principles, we believe this moment demands moral clarity. Anti-Semitism is not only a threat to Jewish students, faculty, and staff, it's a threat to the very fabric of our American society. I recognize that for many in our Jewish community, Israel is a core part of their identity. Those community members and every community member deserve to feel safe on campus without exception. We began this work over a year and a half ago. While there's more work to be done, the changes we have made are already fostering a culture of accountability on our campus. We recognize the vigilance on this topic and that it'll need to be a focal point of our work going forward. You have my commitment that we are focused on continuing to make real progress and take action. As a person of faith, I'm personally committed to confronting anti-Semitism wherever it appears, in our institutions, in our communities, and in ourselves. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Dr. Emanuel. And now I recognize Mr. David Cole for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Walberg and Ranking Member Scott.
Press the button, turn the mic on there, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Walberg, much better, and Ranking Member Scott for inviting me to testify today. I come not so much to comment on the specifics of what happened at Haverford, DePaul, or Cal Poly, but to provide a legal framework and a cautionary note. In my work with the ACLU and others, I have defended the speech rights of everyone from the National Rifle Association, which I represented successfully in the Supreme Court just last year, to fundamentalist Christians, to Palestinian students. I've also challenged discrimination on the basis of race, sex, and religion. I care deeply about both values, free speech and equality, and both are at stake here. I have 3 points. First, anti-Semitic speech, while lamentable, is constitutionally protected. Just like racist speech, sexist speech, and homophobic speech is. The Supreme Court protected the rights of the Nazi Party to march in Skokie, the home of Holocaust survivors. Sorry, I just turned my thing off. It protected the rights of the Westboro Baptist Church to hurl homophobic slurs at a military funeral. And it protected the rights of the Ku Klux Klan to burn crosses and engage in racist speech. As Chief Justice Roberts explained in the Westboro Baptist Church case, while such speech obviously causes deep harm, the greater danger is giving government officials the power to censor speech by labeling it anti-Semitic, racist, or sexist. Second, Title VI does not prohibit anti-Semitic speech. It prohibits only the discriminatory denial of equal access to education. An anti-Semitic slogan at a protest or online does not deny equal access to education any more than a sexist or a racist comment at a rally does. Anti-Semitic speech implicates Title VI in only 2 narrow circumstances. First, where it constitutes harassment targeted at an individual because of that individual's Jewish identity. Not because he supports Israel, but because of his Jewish identity specifically. And second, where the speech is not targeted, say at a rally, where it is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it denies equal access to an education. That's a very high standard. It's almost never been met in the case law. That means most anti-Semitic speech does not implicate Title VI at all. Therefore, a school committed to free speech should be tolerating it, not suppressing it, as this committee would ask. And Title VI governs only colleges, not students. So when a student harasses another student, that student hasn't violated Title VI, and the college hasn't violated Title VI because the student doesn't speak for the college. The college only violates Title VI if it is deliberately indifferent to the act. Deliberately indifferent. Again, a very high standard set forth by the Supreme Court in the Davis case and almost never met. That's basically you ignore what has happened rather than respond. Deliberate indifference is not responding to anti-Semitism in a way that this committee doesn't think is sufficient. And that leads me to my third and final point. The line between protected anti-Semitic speech and prohibited anti-Semitic discrimination is necessarily fact-intensive. It requires a careful assessment of what was said, to whom, and why it was said. As a result, it is not sufficient to make general accusations of anti-Semitism, as members of this committee have repeatedly done in all of the prior hearings and already today, any more than it is sufficient under Title IX to label an encounter between 2 students sexual harassment. You need to look at what happened, hear both sides of the encounter, and make a legal assessment, not a political harangue. And therefore, getting to the bottom of what happened here requires fair hearings where both sides are heard about specific incidents. And this committee room is not the place to do that. This committee has not held a single hearing looking into a specific incident and having the perpetrator and the complainant testify and trying to figure out what has happened. Instead, it is engaged in broad-based charges of anti-Semitism without any factual predicate. With all due respect, these proceedings have had more in common with those of the House
I'd
Un-American
ask the gentleman to
Activities Committee
conclude. You've gone past the 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I could just, I have one final comment.
Very
It'll
quick.
Take me a second. Yeah, these proceedings, with all due respect, have more in common with those of the House Un-American Activities Committee. They are not an attempt to find out what happened, but an attempt to chill protected speech.
Thank you for
that
your
was
testimony.
a mistake then, and it's a mistake.
Thank you for your testimony, and I think we did not step on your testimony at that point.
Thank you.
Now I recognize Dr. Armstrong for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Wahlberg, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. For the past 14 years, it's been my privilege to serve as president of Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California. At Cal Poly, we emphasize a learn-by-doing approach, providing hands-on, practical experience, learning from experiences, and constantly getting better. Over the past 18 months, questions have been asked about how higher education institutions confront, prevent, and combat anti-Semitism that escalated after the 2023 Hamas attacks against Israeli citizens. The October 7 attacks on innocent men, women, and children were horrific. The violence perpetrated that day must be condemned without equivocation. And the targeting of Jewish students on campuses across the U.S. that followed was terrible and unacceptable. Both as a university president and a human being, this is a matter I take particularly seriously. We have to do better. At Cal Poly, when people do not live up to our commitment to prohibit prejudice and bias, we hold them accountable. We have dealt with anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination by faculty, staff, visitors, and students. We do not tolerate threatening activity. We deploy campus police whenever there is potential for threatening activity or trouble, and they make arrests and file criminal charges when justified. In addition, when alleged anti-Semitism or harassment occurs, we investigate and impose immediate university discipline. At Cal Poly, we have enjoyed a vibrant Jewish community for many years. Stakeholders rate Jewish life on our campus at a high level, and the number of Jewish students has doubled since 2011. Hillel and Chabad are registered Cal Poly student organizations, and I and my wife have been invited to and proudly participated in some of their activities. I am grateful to the Jewish student leaders who traveled across the country to join me here today. In addition to those long-standing partnerships, I've been working with the ADL and other Jewish leaders on several ongoing and some new initiatives. First, we have continued to be certain to speak out to oppose anti-Semitism. Second, we are enhancing our mandatory student orientation and biennial employee training to provide greater education and awareness about anti-Semitism. Our team is participating in the 5th cohort of Hillel's Campus Climate Initiative. To date, our administrators have attended 8 training sessions. Third, we're establishing a new presidential anti-Semitism task force that will develop an action plan focused on Jewish student life, anti-Semitism education, and cultural awareness. Fourth, we're continuing to fundraise to endow a chair in Jewish studies and build an interfaith center that includes Jewish students. Our efforts to support Jewish students and combat anti-Semitism have made progress. I want to emphasize that our goal is continuous improvement. We will work to give each student the safest possible environment, free from discrimination and religious intolerance, so they can learn, grow, and succeed. We call it being ready day one. We will continue to strongly confront any anti-Semitic conducts or threats. In conclusion, I want to thank you for the important work on this issue and pledge our continuing support.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Under Committee Rule 9, we'll now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I'll recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. This question is for all 3 presidents. All of your schools have been hotbeds of Semitism at some point. Please tell me how many students at your schools have been suspended and how many have been expelled for anti-Semitic conduct since October 7th, 2023. President Raymond?
We don't publicize those numbers, and we use suspension and expelling as normal parts of our disciplinary process.
But you don't have numbers to give us, so we assume there have been none.
We do not talk about those numbers publicly.
Mr. Manuel?
Thank you for the question. Post-October 7th, there were 8 student groups investigated. 2 were suspended and put on probation. I believe there were 2 arrests after the encampment dissolution. One of them, I believe, was a student.
Thank you. President Armstrong?
As a result of events in 2024, we've had a total of 6 students disciplined, with the discipline ranging from 2-quarter suspension to deferred suspension to probation.
Thank you. President Manuel, you say you're committed to addressing anti-Semitism on campus. The group Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, is at the very center of your anti-Semitism problem. Students have been physically and verbally assaulted at multiple SJP protests. SJP was central to the May 2024 encampment, which caused $500,000 in damage. SJP has also circulated deeply anti-Semitic posts on Instagram, including a recent post accusing Israel of being just like the Nazis. President Manuel, considering SJP's history of harassment and violence against Jewish students and its repeated refusal to abide by university policies, will you commit to finally permanently banning SJP from campus?
Thank you for the question. SJP has been suspended. They are on probation, and this post that I think you're referring to happened on Thursday. They were immediately suspended in all their operations from campus pending a new hearing. The cumulative effect of their work will be considered in the results or the outcomes of that next hearing. I'd be happy to report back to you on their
I'd
findings.
be glad to receive that. The cumulative effect seems like it's gone on, and I believe it'd be a point in time for banning. President Raymond, in March, the Haverford and Bryn Mawr group Faculty and Staff for Justice in Palestine, or FSJP, praised a Palestinian terrorist who led an attack in 1978 that killed 38 Israelis, including 13 children. FSJP claimed that the terrorist, and I quote, scarified herself for her country and fought for the freedom of many Palestinians. Does praising the murder of Jews violate any Haverford policies?
Of course it does.
Thank you.
There's no place for that,
Thank you.
ever, anywhere.
Another FSJP post applauded a member of the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, a U.S.-designated terrorist group, because she trained for military operations. Did Haverford professors in this group face any consequences whatsoever?
I am not aware of that particular post, and anti-Semitism in any of its forms is not tolerated at Haverford College.
Well, with these faculty, it seems to have been. I'm going to ask you a few questions about statements we've heard on Haverford's campus since the October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. And again, I will not display all that's in this book, but this reminds us that the attack was not from Israel. The attack was from Hamas. Brutal, unprovoked attack as well. Is the phrase, "long live the Intifada," protected speech on Haverford's campus? Yes or no?
That is an anti-Semitic form of speech.
Is the phrase, "from Gaza to Lebanon, Israel will soon be gone," protected speech on Haverford's campus?
That is repugnant speech. I disavow it. It is anti-Semitic.
And happening. Is the phrase, "resistance is not terrorism," protected speech on Haverford's campus?
Any anti-Semitic speech I will not defend, and at Haverford, we do protect speech.
Do these statements call for the genocide of Jews?
There is no tolerance for any such speech that would call for that.
Well, we hope we see that soon to come. Hamas is gaining support and comfort from schools that allow this to go on, and these go beyond just simply words. They include faculty and students blocking the freedom of education and life itself for Jewish students. I yield back, and now I recognize Representative Bonamici, the gentlelady from Oregon, for her questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've said before in this committee, there has been an undeniable rise in anti-Semitism and hate speech across the country and around the globe. Anti-Semitism is a real problem that has existed for thousands of years and should be taken seriously by schools and universities and by elected officials. Jewish students deserve to feel safe and be safe on campus and everywhere. No one should be afraid of harassment or discrimination because of their faith. And I strongly condemn acts of violence and want to emphasize that people who break the law must be held accountable. But if instead of engaging with this topic genuinely and constructively, we have another performative hearing during which the majority will try to blame the left and what they consider liberal or elitist institutions and colleges for acts of anti-Semitism. It's another chapter in the majority's battle against higher education. And as we've discussed repeatedly, but is worth restating, when white supremacists marched in Charlottesville with burning tiki torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," President Trump said there were fine people on both sides, and I don't recall the Republican majority calling that out. General Kelly, who served as chief of staff in the first Trump administration, said that Donald Trump spoke favorably about Hitler, saying that Hitler had done some good things. Some Republican members of Congress have promoted conspiracy theories like Jewish space lasers that control weather and have accused, quote, Jewish globalist elites of pulling strings behind the scenes of government. Another, a member of this committee, quoted Hitler on the steps of the Capitol. Several members of President Trump's inner circle have public and prominent ties to white nationalist and white supremacist groups. There are more examples, but I've made the point. If this committee is going to tackle the rise in anti-Semitism, let's start there. Let's denounce and condemn all instances of anti-Semitism, including from colleagues and the administration. If we truly want to protect Jewish Americans, we need to speak out regardless of the source and not turn a blind eye when anti-Semitic attacks come from leaders of a political party. For those of us who do want to stop the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, I remind you that the federal government already has an entity in place to investigate and resolve anti-Semitic instances, the Office of Civil Rights, and it is housed, at least for now, in the Department of Education. But unfortunately, Secretary McMahon has fired almost half of OCR's staff and closed 7 of their 12 regional offices. President Trump's recent budget called for a 35% cut to the Office of Civil Rights. Will any of the Republicans on this committee stand against the dismantling of the Office of Civil Rights? I doubt it, because that would require a real commitment to combating anti-Semitism. And if you truly want to stand up for the Jewish people, condemn the white Christian nationalism seeping into policy in the White House. Speak up against the attempts to end the separation of religion and government. Show your support for freedom of religion. It is unconscionable to weaponize the real problems of the Jewish community for political gain, and I'm not going to engage in more back and forth in this hearing with people who call out anti-Semitism when it's part of their anti-higher education agenda, but not when it's coming from their side of the aisle. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter in a statement into the record from Northwestern University in which more than 100 Jewish faculty and staff members raised serious concerns about how Congress is addressing anti-Semitism. They say we come from different points on a political compass. We express our identities as Jews in myriad ways, but we are united by the conviction that our Jewishness must not be used as a cudgel to silence the vigorous exchange of ideas that lie at the heart of university life. And I also request unanimous consent to insert into the record a statement from the Jewish Council on Public Affairs and a broad coalition of Jewish groups in which they emphasize that they, quote, firmly reject the false choice between confronting anti-Semitism and upholding democracy. Our safety as Jews has always been tied to the rule of law, to the safety of others, to the strength of civil society, and to the protection of rights and liberty for all. It continues, it is both possible and necessary to fight anti-Semitism on campus, in our communities, and across the country without abandoning the democratic values that have allowed Jews and so many other vulnerable minorities to thrive. Mr. Chairman, as a mother who raised her children in a Jewish home—
Without objection, they will be received.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a mother who raised her children in a Jewish home and as an active member of my synagogue for more than 25 years, I can no longer pretend that this is a good faith effort to root out anti-Semitism, especially when the Trump administration and the majority party are regularly undermining Jewish values, including justice, loving kindness, free speech, freedom of religion, and the Jewish responsibility of tikkun olam, to repair the world. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Representative Wilson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Tim Walberg, and I appreciate your leadership for promoting real academic freedom with real diversity of ideology, with equality, and with real political inclusion. With that in mind, all Americans in good faith want college education to be uplifting for students and to achieve the American dream. But unfortunately, the barbaric mass murder of October 7th by Iranian puppets of Hamas invading Israel has shockingly revealed that many college campuses are anti-Semitic in defending the maniacal Hamas agenda. The world should know the Hamas Covenant of August 18, 1988 declares in the midst of insane provisions, Article 7, quote, "The day of judgment will come when all and not come and about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, 'Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him,'" end of quote. That's their ideology. Free Palestine from the river to the sea is a code for death to Israel, death to America. We know that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I'm very grateful that I grew up in South Carolina and represent South Carolina. At the time of the American Revolution, the largest Jewish population in the New World was in Charleston, South Carolina. The very first provincial constitution to recognize Judaism was the Provincial Constitution of South Carolina. The first Jewish American elected official in the New World was the Provincial Assembly of South Carolina. And sadly, the first Jewish American killed in the Revolution was in Charleston, South Carolina. And so that's the environment I grew up in. In South Carolina, we do not tolerate anti-Semitism. We promote diversity of ideology, equality, and we promote additionally ideological inclusion. President Raymond, we know that unfortunately anti-Semitism has existed long before the murderous atrocities of October 7th, and sadly I visited Kibbutz Nir Oz. I visited the music site where the slaughters occurred, the mass slaughters. The committee recently learned that in 2020 you met with a Jewish student about the severe harassment and cyberbullying that he was experiencing at Haverford because of his Jewish identity. In response, you allegedly gave him a book by a Buddhist monk and told him that he should accept the harassment and, quote, "let it wash over," end of quote. Should Jewish students at Haverford simply let the experience of anti-Semitism wash over them?
Our Jewish students and our Jewish community are highly valued at Haverford. They have been an important part of our community for a long time. And my top priority is ensuring the well-being and safety of all of our students.
And so I'm confident you've changed policy since then. With this, Dr. Armstrong, you're identified as an outspoken DEI proponent. I believe that DEI, it chills and actually restricts and restrains academic freedom. It's been my view that diversity means no ideological diversity, no conservative. I remember in college, with my National Review, I would fold it in half because I didn't want my professors to see. I was reading the writings of William F. Buckley, Jr., seditious. With the equity, what that means is that all are the same, regardless of what's the achievement level, and it denies equality of opportunity. And inclusion, again, is so political. That means no Republicans. I remember that I had, in my undergraduate and law school, one Republican professor, Professor J.D. Futch III of Baltimore. And I knew where the others were coming from. And so what is your interpretation of DEI? Because as it's being experienced, it's chilling, as Mr. Cole said. What's your experience?
Well, thank you for your question. I go back to Cal Poly since I've been there. We've focused on student success and all student success. So we've
Does that mean equity for everybody? They all get the same grade?
Oh, no, sir. Cal Poly's a very competitive university.
It should be.
And we have been admitting students under Prop 209 has been in existence for more than 25 years in California. So we've been operating under an affirmative action ban during that time. And we have had significant changes in the makeup of our population because we've increased financial aid and made students more able to
As we
travel.
conclude,
to
I would
Cal
really
Poly.
like to know the percentage of conservatives of professors, the percentage of Republicans, because I'm sadly concerned there are none or very few. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from California, Representative Takano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to associate myself with the remarks of my colleague, Suzanne Bonamici. I know of no member who exemplifies more the principle of tikkun olam than her, to repair the world. And I saw some rolling of the eyes, which is, of course, people are entitled to their opinions, and we in our country have different viewpoints. And we must seek not only tolerance, but encouragement of a difference of a point of view. I, too, condemn anti-Semitism unequivocally. I condemn Islamophobia unequivocally. I condemn all discrimination based on religion. And universities must set that principle. But, we have a system, we have in place legal mechanisms to hold the universities accountable who receive federal money, to hold them accountable for discrimination that occurs on the basis of religion. Mr. Cole, if a student or faculty member feels that their Title VI civil rights, their ability to not be discriminated based on their religion, that those Title VI rights have been violated, what federal agency is tasked with the investigation of their claim and enforcement of civil rights law?
The Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education.
So the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, which prior to the Trump administration was the largest federal agency tasked with the enforcement of civil rights in the country, and that would include Title VI rights which involve religious discrimination.
That's right.
How many OCR field offices have been closed under the Trump administration?
My understanding is 7 of the 12, so more than half have been closed.
7 of the 12. In the remaining offices, we hear anecdotally that some attorneys are being tasked with up to 300 cases per staffer. How long typically does one case take to get resolved?
It can take a very long time to get resolved, and if you cut the staff in half, it's going to take twice as long.
And why does it take so long? You mentioned earlier in testimony.
It takes so long for a couple of reasons. One is you actually have to look at the facts, not make broad allegations as this committee seems to do, but rather look at the actual facts of what happened, assess both sides of the story, not just one, then make a determination as to whether it is actually discrimination. Then if it actually constitutes discrimination, then you go to the university and you say, how did you respond? And if the university responded by holding a hearing and making an assessment, that no violation has occurred. Only if the university was deliberately indifferent, ignored the violation, and an established violation, is it responsible. So you have to actually have a fair hearing. You have to look at the facts. You have to hear both sides, not simply come into a committee room and make broad allegations without any assessment of what the actual facts are.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. I note here that we have universities that are near San Francisco, Chicago, and Philadelphia. All 3 of those offices of OCR, Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education, those field offices have been closed. So what would happen to a student who had a claim of religious discrimination in any one of these 3 universities? What is their recourse now?
I don't think they have much recourse.
So the concern over this committee about anti-Semitism, in reality, it seems to be very hollow and empty, because they're not concerned about how you actually investigate and adjudicate a claim of religious discrimination. Am I correct?
Right. They should be calling Secretary of Education McMahon before the committee and asking her why she has decimated the very office that is supposed to be enforcing anti-discrimination law.
Mr. Cole, do you view universities as kind of places of independence, that government should not be imposing its politics on a university? I mean, I heard implied here that maybe there should be some influence over who gets hired as faculty.
Yeah, and not only do I believe that, but the Supreme Court believes that. It has said that academic freedom is a special concern of the First Amendment, and what academic freedom means is that government officials, including members of Congress, don't have the power to decide that a particular university has too many liberal professors or too many conservative professors. That is for the university to decide. It does not empower members of this committee to complain about DEI programs that they don't like. That is for the university to decide under academic freedom, under the core principle of the First Amendment, that universities make these decisions, not politicians.
I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Stefanik.
Thank you. A question for each of you. Is calling for the genocide of Jews protected speech on your campus, starting with Haverford?
No, of course not.
And what disciplinary action has been taken or would be taken if someone made that call?
Representative, there have been no such calls, and we would use all of our disciplinary actions to follow through on any such call. I would never expect that to happen at Haverford, and if it would, we would deal with that swiftly.
Well, let me ask you a specific question then. There was a student group on Haverford's campus who called for the complete dismantling of the apartheid settler colonial state of Israel by all means necessary. What does by all means necessary mean to you?
Invoking that kind of terminology is repugnant because of what it can mean, and I will not
So does that depend on the context?
I will not defend that statement.
So what disciplinary action was taken against that group or those individuals who made that call? Any disciplinary action? Was there any disciplinary action taken against that group or those individuals?
Those kinds of statements are
I'm not asking you if they're
very
repugnant.
challenging.
I'm asking about the disciplinary action. You were the one university president who failed to lay out if any disciplinary action has been taken, if any suspensions or expulsions. So I am asking you, was there any disciplinary action taken?
Disciplinary action can include expulsion and
I'm not asking what it can include. I'm asking, was it taken?
I will not be talking about individual cases here, and I'm saying that that is
So have there been any
absolutely-
disciplinary actions taken by Haverford related to anti-Semitism? Any?
Disciplinary actions are absolutely in our work
Have they been taken?
against anti-Semitism.
Have they been taken by Haverford?
Yes, there have been some.
I want to ask you another example. There was a professor of mathematics and statistics who posted after the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks, quote, "We should never have to apologize for celebrating these scenes of an imprisoned people breaking free from their chains. This was a historic moment to be recorded in their history books." Jewish students have reported that you said this post could be, quote, "perceived in many ways." Does this post simply depend on the context, President Rabin? And were there any disciplinary actions taken against this professor?
Such posts have been incredibly harmful to our entire community, and I disavow them and that outcome for us.
Was there an investigation of the professor?
Investigations happen in all such cases.
So yes, in this case.
Investigations happen in all such cases, as I have said. And we follow.
This is a simple question. The other presidents are answering this straightforward as to disciplinary action. Again, these university presidents who are former presidents fail to answer these direct questions. In this case, was there disciplinary action taken or an investigation of this professor?
Respectfully, Representative, I will not be talking about individual cases here.
Respectfully, President of Haverford, many people have sat in this position who are no longer in the positions as president of universities for their failure to answer straightforward questions. Another question I have, because this is a theme at Haverford, there was an administrator who said that, quote, racial minority students have never felt safe at Haverford, and that Jewish prospective students should not expect to feel safe and should instead be brave. This was according to litigation against your college. Was there any investigation into this administrator for making those statements?
That report does not reflect the administrators that I know who stand strongly with me and the entire college against anti-Semitism.
So that didn't happen, is your position? Was that statement not made by that administrator?
That statement does not comport with those administrators that I know.
I'm not asking if it comports with the administrators that you know. I'm saying, is it your testimony that that statement did not happen, even though it's coming out in litigation? So are you saying it did not happen?
What I am saying is that I cannot imagine that happening from those colleagues of mine.
Well, let me ask you, if it did happen, what disciplinary action would Haverford take against that administrator?
At Haverford, we do not tolerate discrimination or harassment or bias.
And what does that mean, not tolerate? Does that mean suspension, firing of that individual? What does that mean?
It means following all of our policies, which begin with investigation and then can lead to any of the aspects that you listed.
For the American people watching, you still don't get it. Haverford still doesn't get it. It's a very different testimony than the other presidents who are here today who are coming with specifics. So again, this is completely unacceptable, and it's why this committee has stepped in, because higher education has failed to address the scourge of anti-Semitism, putting Jewish students at risk at Haverford and other campuses across the country. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I recognize now the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr.
Adams.
Chairman. I mean, as a former college professor, I really hate to see that we're threatening our leadership of these schools. But thank you, Mr. Chair. We're here today to discuss something that should never be up for debate. Every student, regardless of background, deserves to feel safe and welcome and protected on campuses, on all campuses. And that includes Jewish students, that includes Muslim students, that includes every student. Anti-Semitism is real, it's rising, and it has no place in our schools, our communities, or in our country, and I want to be real clear about that. But this week, my office and I met with a group of Jewish students from Columbia, students who came to Washington not to cause controversy, but to be heard. And they told me what they're living through. Jewish students denied housing after participating in a protest, religious observances disrupted, students locked out of dining halls during kosher Passover or unable to gather for Shabbat. Others disciplined for simply wearing shirts that say ICE off campus. And perhaps most troubling, students forced into anti-Semitism training led by someone who really wasn't even Jewish. I share these stories not to spark outrage, but because they're real. But I believe that we cannot confront hate unless we listen to the people living with it. And so when Jewish students say that they feel unsafe, we have to take that seriously. And that also means upholding civil rights under Title VI, not replacing legal standards with partisan scorecards. And that means resourcing the Office for Civil Rights, not cutting it. And that means fostering interfaith efforts that build bridges, not eliminating DEI programs that were designed to create belonging for everyone. And let me just say that plainly. Jewish safety and free expression are not mutually exclusive. We can and we must protect both, and that's why I was encouraged to hear about Cal Poly's Interfaith Center, a space designed to include Jewish students not just in name, but in purpose. And because when students gather across faiths and backgrounds to talk, to grieve, to organize together, that's how we build resilience, and that's how we push back against hate. And that's how we remind each other that the loudest voices aren't always the ones speaking for all of us. And so today I do want to urge our committee to move forward carefully. Let's not act on faith, not fear. Let's not address hate, not weaponize it, or let's address hate and not weaponize it. And let's protect students, not politicize their pain. It's prevention, it's education, and it's showing every student from the Ivy League to the community college that they belong. Dr. Raymond, we've seen members of this committee and even the president blame diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. But I've always believed DEI, when done right, help build understanding and safety for all students. So my question, how is your campus making sure that anti-Semitism is directly addressed in your inclusion efforts, not ignored or sidelined? And how do you ensure that Jewish students feel seen, included, and protected in these efforts? And have you found that this kind of work supports Jewish student safety rather than undermines it?
Inclusion work at Haverford is just that. It includes everyone. We are committed to supporting all students in our Jewish community and all of our Jewish community, and our work in inclusion and belonging is exactly that. We have 3 Jewish student groups on the campus who are very active. We have an active staff and faculty Jewish group, and all those come under the arch and the arc of inclusion and belonging.
Thank you very much. Dr. Armstrong, in your written testimony, you noticed that Cal Poly is establishing an interfaith center, which includes participation from Jewish students, and I've heard from students across the country who've said that their interfaith spaces, when done thoughtfully, can make a real difference. So could you share a little bit more about how that initiative was developed, who was involved, and how has it helped build trust or provide support for students who may feel targeted, especially in this tense moment on so many campuses?
Well, thank you for that question. We've been working over a number of years to make sure all students have a way to connect. We've been talking with Chabad and Hillel about this project, as well as other religious leaders, for several years. And, you know, COVID and like anything slowed us down a bit, but we view that as an opportunity where students can come together, where they can have the dialogue. We recently had a presentation that brought together a Palestinian and an Israeli view, and it was university and Chabad and Hillel participating in that.
Thank you, sir. I'm out of time, and Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. She yields back. I now recognize Representative Miller, the gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you. President Manuel, of the 3 schools represented here today, DePaul had the worst encampment. From the days the tents went up, the encampment on DePaul's campus was a hotbed of anti-Semitism. Signs featuring terrible anti-Semitic slogans and images glorifying terrorism were displayed in the encampment. We saw images of a flag depicting the spokesman of the terrorist group, Hamas. We saw a sign that said, "Jewish safety cannot be achieved until Palestine is freed." There were reports of people at the encampment threatening to slit Jews' throats. One student walking through the university there were 1,000 complaints from students in the community. The encampment remained in place for 17 days. President Manuel, how many students were suspended for their conduct at the encampment?
Thank you for the question. The security and safety of our students is the top priority in that moment. The moment we realized that safety was being jeopardized, we moved with Chicago Police Department to abandon the encampment. Please know that our public safety officers are not sworn officers, and we need to work with CPD to make that happen. In review of the encampment, there were 8 student groups that were brought in for investigation. 2 of them were immediately suspended and put on probation, which means they can't access university resources, including financial resources. There were two people that were arrested. I believe one of them was a student in the aftermath of that. But what happened in the aftermath of that is we realized our inadequacies in that moment, and we're able to put together a culture of accountability that includes new masking and ID policies, new time, place, and manner policies. And since that moment, we've been able to repel 4 such efforts for outside entities to come and take over campus properties.
Well, I'm glad to know that you are moving forward on better policies. So you're saying that this encampment remained in place for 17 days, and there were $500,000 worth of property damage, and you were only able to suspend 2 students?
I'm saying that the lessons we learned from that moment have activated it.
2 students were arrested. I mean, not arrested, suspended.
2 student groups were suspended. 2 people were arrested. I believe one was a student.
For $500,000 worth of damage in 17 days. You got 2. Woo. Okay, the DePaul's Student Conduct Code also states dismissal is a permanent separation from the university. How many students were dismissed from DePaul as a result of the encampment?
Our codes have been updated as a result of what we've learned from the encampment. From that encampment, I don't believe any students were permanently dismissed or expelled, but the new accountability code we have has prevented these actions from happening.
So before you have your new accountability code, you didn't have anything in place where a student could be dismissed for violent speech and for causing $500,000 worth of damage?
Anybody who caused violence or damaged property could go through that process. Regarding the encampment, that's where we learned that we need to do better at applying ourselves to those policies, and that's where the policy engagements came in place. That's where the changes.
There were 1,000 complaints, 16 instances of intimidation, 4 credible threats of violence, 77 reports of individual safety concerns, 4 allegations of battery, 13 harassment allegations, and at least 1 death threat. And you allowed this encampment to continue for 17 days, and 2 people were suspended. None were dismissed. Again, President Manuel, during the encampment, 1 Jewish student told our committee last month that when she reached her dorm lobby, 2 students shouted at her, "We don't F with Zionists," even though she was not wearing anything to publicly indicate a Jewish or Israeli identity. She did not know either of them, but the incident made her think that they knew who she was. Were these individuals disciplined?
Every individual that was reported came through our system, was investigated, and results happened. I agree with you, Representative, that
So
we
were they
were not at our
disciplined,
best.
suspended, or dismissed?
I gave you the results of who was suspended and arrested. I don't know of all the incidents that were there. I will tell you that the numbers that you mentioned were on a website that I released so that I could educate the community about the dangers of that encampment. That's when we learned we had to do better, and we had to create a culture of accountability.
So much of the information I read earlier regarding hundreds of complaints and violent anti-Semitic signage had been posted online. However, the university has taken that website down.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you.
We need to move on. I recognize the gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. McMath.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also Ranking Member Scott. And thank you to our witnesses for taking the time to be with us here today. I also want to thank the students, any students that are with us, any students that are watching this morning. And I do say that I'm very, very sorry to those who are victims of hate crimes. My son Jordan was unfortunately killed in a racially motivated shooting. So I know what it's like for your family to be attacked solely because of who you are or how you were born. Anti-Semitism remains a growing threat on college campuses today, but the actions taken by President Trump and House Republicans seem to be motivated more by going viral on social media than rooting out anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred on campus and in our society. The actions taken and supported by the majority will not improve this situation. They will only foster distrust between ethnic and religious groups on and both off campus. Instead of taking real steps to address anti-Semitism, the majority has chosen to cut the funding and fire the federal employees that are tasked with responding to these incidents on our school grounds. They have paused and threatened funding meant to protect synagogues and other Jewish community centers from shootings and other threats through the nonprofit security and targeting violence and terrorism prevention grant programs. They have pardoned and defended the actions of violent felons and rabid anti-Semites, criminals that were directly involved in attacking police and killing an officer here on Capitol Hill, January 6th. When white supremacists marched through the University of Virginia wielding torches with the purpose of publicly intimidating Jews and other minorities, the president said that they were very fine people on both sides. They are not the actions of a party or a president who is engaging in good faith to address this very real crisis and problem. Any attempt to explain away one of the oldest forms of ethnic and religious hatred solely for political gain is truly a disservice to the American people. It cheapens and it undermines the centuries of sacrifice and interfaith struggle to build bridges and take the difficult but very necessary steps that will bring peace and allow people to practice their faiths free from intolerance. Fighting anti-Semitism should not be used as a political tool. The work is simply too important, and the stakes are simply too high. Today, my state is home to the largest Jewish population in the Deep South. Georgia has become a beacon of prosperity for Jewish families hoping to live together in peace, free from judgment regarding their faith. But it has not always been this way. I live just a few miles from the site of one of the most heinous and violent acts of anti-Semitism in the history of this country, the lynching of Leo Frank. I have been to the halls of names at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem a number of times. It takes commitment from every single one of us to ensure that the atrocities of the past never repeat themselves. I ask the American people and all those who care, truly care about religious freedom in this country, all those who want this country to live up to the promise that all of us, every single one of us, is created equal, to compare what they hear from my Republican colleagues today to the actions that they take when the cameras aren't rolling. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank the gentlelady for her experience that informs her as well. Now I recognize a gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I happen to agree with my colleague. Actions speak louder than words, and we need action. And that's what I hope that we see here today, not just in the week leading up to this hearing, we all of a sudden find a conscience and start action. So let me start with you, Dr. Manuel. On October 18th, 23, DePaul Students for Justice in Palestine held a rally calling for the Intifada revolution, encouraging terrorist attacks to be perpetuated against Jewish civilians. On the same day, Jewish student leaders contacted DePaul administrators expressing feelings of saying they were increasingly scared that the safety and for the safety of the Jewish community. Does that ring a bell? Okay. The following day, October 19th, 2023, pro-Hamas rallies on campus resulted in the physical assault of a Jewish student. Sound familiar? 6 months later, on April 29th, 24, a pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas mob occupied DePaul's Lincoln Park campus. So there was an encampment on April 29th, correct?
Correct.
Did you remove it or disable it on that day?
No, we did not.
Okay. Why?
Representative, we learned an awful lot
I'm
from
not asking what you learned. I'm asking why you made the decision, because I'm going to refer you to your policy that you have in place. Why didn't you follow your policy?
Our immediate instinct was to work with our students. The reference.
How'd that go?
Not very
You
well.
want to ask Michael how that went?
Yeah, it did not go very well.
Thank you.
And I apologize for that.
Your apologies are a little hollow. On May 10th, you issued a statement. So the encampment's still there, April 29th. It's now May 10th. On May 10th, you issued a statement titled Quad Safety Concerns. So you knew there was a safety issue, hence issuing the statement. Here was the statement. You urged all members of the DePaul community to avoid the quad. Well, that's great. Again, hey, let's make sure that we attack the law-abiding citizens, but not deal with the problem of the encampment. So you knew yourself there was a problem, but decided not to remove it. Why?
So that at that moment, we realized that the security and safety of everybody was in jeopardy. That is the moment that we decided to work with CPD.
And it took you 6 days?
Our public safety officer.
I mean, no, it took you 6 days because you knew it was dangerous. You didn't remove it on the 10th. You didn't remove it until 6 days later. So it took you 6 days to coordinate an effort to remove an encampment?
It took us the moment we realized. We went to CPD and asked for
Which
their
was
help.
when? When did you realize you had a problem?
We started working with CPD from the first day so that they were aware of those
Okay,
situations.
so 3 weeks. It took you 3 weeks?
It took us from the time you mentioned until the 16th or 17th to coordinate with CPD to get
Do you think that's acceptable?
I do not. And
Okay,
what we
wonderful,
learned-
wonderful, wonderful. So I don't think the issue is more policies. I think the issue is action. So the people that are in charge, would you say that that is an acceptable amount of time for action?
I would agree with you that we need to do better.
Great. So would you agree with me also that almost 3 weeks from the 29th to the 16th is not an acceptable time for security to take action to disassemble an encampment? Would you agree with me on that?
I would. And
Thank you very much. So who has been fired or who has been replaced? Because that doesn't seem real tough to me. Anybody?
What we have learned,
Anybody been replaced?
there has been turnover. It's not
I'm not
because of
asking
this.
turnover. What consequences happened for the people who were supposed to be in charge?
The development of our accountability
Any
culture.
consequences? Yeah, just, were there, let's start with a simple,
retraining.
let's start with a simple one. Any consequences?
To student groups, yes.
Not just, I'm talking to the people who didn't follow your procedures of 3 weeks. Because let me just read it, just in case you don't know your policy, but let me read it. This is from your policy. May not impede passage or in or out of any facility, may not involve activity that is violent or otherwise threatens the safety of demonstrators or any members of the community, may not interfere with business or academics of the university. These are your policies that did anyone get reprimanded for that?
What I mentioned is that we have done significant review and learned from this. Our
You don't need to do
accountability is
review. Was anyone held accountable other than Michael and his friend that sustained a concussion and a broken wrist? So what actions changed? Because you got great policies and you got great lip service. The problem is you need action. And unless you as the president of the university is willing to take action, not lip service, I can talk about working out all day long, but there's a lot difference between me working out and me talking about it. So my question is, if there is another encampment on that, are you taking it down that next day?
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, and I recognize the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Representative Hayes.
Good morning, and thank you to our witnesses for being here and to all of the students who are following along and paying attention to this hearing. It is incredibly painful for me as a member of Congress to sit and witness anti-Semitism and discrimination against students on college campuses being politicized over and over and over again. As the ranking member stated, we've had 8 hearings on this topic. There are members on the other side who only show up for hearings on this topic, and yet no real action has been done. When we talk about actions that are taken, I heard members talking about property damage. There was over $2 billion in property damage and expenses to taxpayers as a result of the January 6th insurrection. And the president gave sweeping clemency to 1,600 people, and it's been celebrated by the other side. The Confederate flag was flown inside of the United States Capitol for the first time in our history, and the people who did that are being celebrated. So we have to take a stand against discrimination in all forms on this committee, and all students on all campuses should feel free from discrimination and protected and have their right to learn in an environment. To the college presidents, you will find no safe harbor here if you have not taken actions and steps to ensure that students are safe on your campuses. All students. Hostility and prejudice against Jewish students is wrong, and similarly, other other students who are not feeling safe on campuses is also wrong, and this committee has done nothing. Actually, some of the actions taken by this committee have targeted some of those students and literally made them unsafe on campus. So we need to all agree that discrimination is intolerable on college campuses, and you have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that the civil rights of students are protected. I have a bunch of questions because I want to know about actions, but just please yes or no. I'm going to just go down. Dr. Raymond, are you prioritizing the physical safety of students on your campus today?
Yes, safety is top priority.
Dr. Manuel, do you believe that teaching the history of discrimination, even when it's painful, is incredibly important for our institutions of higher education?
Yes.
Dr. Cole, have you clarified and publicized the rules surrounding campus protests for all students to see?
I'm not speaking here on behalf of Georgetown, but we have a clear policy at Georgetown.
Is it publicized?
Absolutely, it's on our website. I was the chair of the working group on free speech and campus culture. We believe in free speech, and we believe in protecting people from discrimination, and we believe in making a distinction between the two, which unfortunately many members of this committee do not believe in.
Thank you. Dr. Armstrong, have you implemented reporting mechanisms for incidents of bias on your campus?
Yes.
Dr. Raymond, have you clarified and raised awareness around university standards for anti-discrimination educational programs?
Yes, we have.
Dr. Manuel, do you believe that it is important that students see themselves reflected in the faculty at your university?
I do, ideologically and every other category as well, yes.
Dr. Cole, not on behalf of your university, but are students allowed to connect and engage with members in faith-based groups on campus so that they can express their ideas and ideologies in a protected way?
On every campus that I'm aware of, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Armstrong, have you convened a task force to combat anti-discrimination on campus?
Yes.
Dr. Manuel, do you understand the role of the Office of Civil Rights at the role that the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education plays in protecting students from discrimination at colleges and universities? And do you think that this would be helpful as you move forward trying to keep students safe on campus?
I do, and the OCR has been very helpful in helping us understand how to comply with the law.
Thank you. And with that, I think that this committee should be working on keeping OCR together to help you enforce these policies moving forward so that all students are protected on college campuses. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Now I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Representative Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the panelists that have been a part of this today for your perseverance and your time. I want to address a question to President Raymond. President Raymond, days after the October 7th attack on Israel, Haverford College released a statement that highlighted, quote, tragedies across the globe that had occurred, quote, since the start of the semester. The email mentioned earthquakes in Morocco and Afghanistan, wildfires in the United States and Canada, and a 2-year-long war in Ukraine. The email only made a passing reference, and I quote, the outbreak of war in Israel and Gaza that had taken place just 48 hours before. We all know in this room October 7th was not a mutual, quote, outbreak of war between two countries. In fact, it was a terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. Babies were butchered, women were raped, 1,200 innocents were slaughtered, and over 250 people were kidnapped. I have to ask, why did Haverford lack the moral clarity to immediately and clearly condemn the attack on Israel?
Representative Harris, we did condemn the attack by Hamas on Israel, and it was not, you are correct, in that email, which I was responsible for, and I would do it differently now. This is an example of a difficult period of learning where I did not get it right.
Okay. So you say in your testimony, and I've read your testimony beforehand, the written testimony we received, that, quote, any failures and fractures at Haverford are ultimately my responsibility as president. So do you take responsibility for this failure to call the attack what it was immediately?
I take responsibility for the judgment about that communication. That's right.
Okay. Well, on January 4th, 2024, an anonymous author, presumably a Haverford student, published an article on the Political Science Department website expressing dismay for the response of the campus to October 7th. The article highlights the morally bankrupt responses of students to the violence, for example, sharing how students posted phrases like, quote, freedom has only ever been achieved through resistance. Stand with Palestinian resistance, end quote. The author wrote in reaction to seeing these statements posted on his or her classmates that, quote, up until October 7th, I had truly believed that at a liberal arts institution like Haverford, there was no place for anti-Semitism, but I do not know how else to label cheering the death of innocent Jews. Many student activists across the country have used the slogan, resistance is justified when people are occupied, as their motivation for praising the violence that was perpetrated against Israel. I ask you, President Raymond, yes or no, was the October 7th attack on Israel justified?
Absolutely not.
Thank you, ma'am.
No.
And I agree, and it's good to hear you confirm that. And I certainly hope and pray that students around the country, including those enrolled at Haverford, come to realize this very thing as well. I want to turn in my last minute or so to President Manuel. I want to ask you a series of questions, if I will. Have there been violent protests on your campus in response to the war in Sudan?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did DePaul experience encampments over the war in Ukraine?
Also not that I'm aware of.
Have there been chants calling for the eradication of other people groups on your campus besides the Jewish people?
Again, not that I'm aware of.
Thank you, sir. I think we all know why there is no such focus on the world, why there is such a focus on the world's only Jewish state. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has been spreading like wildfire among our nation's campuses. And as a result, anything Israel does to defend itself and its people faces increased scrutiny that no other nation on earth seems to face. I'm glad we're having this hearing today, and I commend our chairman for helping us shine a light on this very important problem that is plaguing American higher education. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Kassar.
The Republican majority has called a hearing on anti-Semitism, and so I have some questions for my colleagues on the committee. Donald Trump said after neo-Nazis marched through Charlottesville that there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. If you condemn Donald Trump saying this, will you raise your hand? RFK, the head of Health and Human Services, spread an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that COVID was engineered to target white and black people, but spare Jewish people. If you condemn the head of the U.S. Health and Human Services for spreading this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, will you please raise your hand? Nobody.
I'd suggest the hearing is to question the witnesses that are here who have spent time and energy to come here.
I have a question for you, Mr. Chairman.
So I think the questioning is
Mr. Chairman, will you condemn?
I am not on the witness stand.
Mr. Chairman, this is my time, and I'm happy to ask you then. Would you condemn Donald Trump for pardoning a January 6th rioter who praised Hitler and encouraged more killing of Jewish people? Mr. Chairman, since you just used some of my time, you can use more of it. Will you condemn Trump for pardoning an anti-Semitic rioter?
I'm seeing 4 witnesses waiting for your question.
I'm asking you a question, Mr. Chairman. Your microphone works. Do you condemn this?
I will yield time to the witnesses to answer questions that are pertinent.
So clearly, Mr. Chairman, not a single Republican today has been willing to condemn any of this anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, the party of very fine people on both sides, or Jewish space lasers, does not give a damn about stopping anti-Semitism. If my Republican colleagues want to stop the spread of anti-Semitism, maybe they should stop apologizing for and promoting anti-Semites. And with all due respect to the Congresswoman from New York who's back to join us, if Republicans want to fight anti-Semitism, they shouldn't go groveling to the most anti-Semitic president in modern American history. They shouldn't be trying to quell questions about the anti-Semitism that we see at the White House and in the cabinet at the Department of Health and Human Services. In my city of Austin, swastikas have been drawn on the doors of schoolhouses. Synagogues have been firebombed. Anti-Semitism is an assault on our community safety and on all of our values. And we could do something to combat anti-Semitism. In Congress, we could strengthen the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. But instead, Trump has cut it, and my Republican colleagues have done nothing about it. Congress could strengthen anti-hate crime programs to address anti-Semitic violence. Trump has cut those programs. Again, Republican members of Congress done nothing about it. We could fully fund the security programs we have for Jewish nonprofits and synagogues, but Trump has frozen those programs. So Republicans have called this hearing on anti-Semitism, but they've cut back our ability to address hate crimes, have cut back our ability to protect synagogues, have cut back our ability to protect students from discrimination. But what they have ramped up is deporting students for writing op-eds in their campus newspaper advocating for peace. What they have ramped up is arresting nonviolent professors and students, Jewish and not Jewish, just because they dare talk about the killing and starvation in Gaza. This hearing, called by the Republican majority, is all about Trump Republicans distorting the definition of anti-Semitism to silence anyone, including Jewish students, who speak out nonviolently against what the Israeli government is doing. The Republican plan is not about keeping Jewish students safe. It's about keeping the Israeli government safe from any form of criticism. That is a disservice to the truth. It is a disservice to us and our job as members of Congress, and it's a disservice to the safety of everyone, including and especially Jewish Americans. I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and now I recognize the Chairman Emeritus of this committee, gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. President Raymond, in August 2024, Guanchun Ha, a religion professor at Haverford, wrote on X that, quote, "The state of Israel must be dismantled and the society denazified. Zionism is Nazism, it is fascism. Zionists are racist." Professor Ha also wrote, quote, "The only way to deal with Zionists is to stop talking to them and refuse to let them waste your time. Liberal Zionists in particular." And I learned a new term, reluctant Zionists, and I guess there were plenty of reluctant Nazis too. Perhaps a majority of them were, end quote. Do you believe there's a distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism?
Representative Fox, first
Just a quick answer, yes or no?
I want to say that we support all of our Zionist students, staff, and faculty at Haverford, and we are squarely against anti-Semitism.
Do you believe anti-Zionism is any more acceptable than anti-Semitism?
Anti-Semitism is unacceptable. There is no place for it.
How about anti-Zionism?
There is room for criticizing the government of any nation.
Yeah, but the state of Israel has existed for almost 80 years. Under the premise of anti-Zionism, a Jewish state as it exists today shouldn't exist. Is that what you believe, that Israel should not exist?
Pardon me, that is not at all what I said or what I meant here.
Okay, so what are anti-Zionists actually advocating for when the Jewish state has existed for nearly 80 years? 80 decades, excuse me. 8 decades.
I do not support those statements at all.
But that's a professor at your university. On the extreme, this means the genocide of Israelis. At the very least, it reveals national origin discrimination violations if done in programs or activities in higher ed. Dr. Raymond, do you believe that Professor Ha's insistence that Zionists shouldn't be engaged with and that they should be compared to Nazis could be a violation of Department of Education civil rights protections? Yes or no?
We do not tolerate discrimination, harassment, or bias at Haverford College. And
For Dr. Armstrong, according to reports, Cal Poly's history department hosted UC Berkeley professor Usama Makdizi, a self-avowed anti-Zionist. Do you believe anti-Zionism could constitute national origin discrimination, yes or no?
Yes.
Dr. Manuel, does DePaul University support BDS?
We do not, and we've come out strongly against it, at least in the 2.5 years that I've been there, including a rebuke of a student government
And
resolution.
will you supply that statement to me after this?
I would be happy to.
Dr. Armstrong, does Cal Poly support BDS?
No.
Dr. Manuel, it's my understanding you gave in to some demands made by the student coalition behind DePaul's violent anti-Semitic May 24 encampment, even though the encampment had to be forcibly removed. The encampment coalition demanded that DePaul eliminate, quote, discriminatory study abroad program trips to Israel that propagandize and normalize that occupation, end quote. As you may know, this has been a key goal of anti-Semitic BDS activists at universities across the U.S. In June, DePaul said it agreed to discuss inclusivity with regard to its Israel study abroad program. Does inclusivity mean, what does it mean in this context?
Thank you for the question. The 10 demands that were delivered by the students were rejected, and none of them were adhered to. None of them were agreed to.
Okay, my question is, what does inclusivity mean?
I believe that the program you're talking about, students were concerned that there was a limitation on who could take it based on visas given from Israel. And we still support that program.
Do you commit to continuing the university study abroad program in Israel?
We commit to studying, to continuing all study abroad programs through and compliant with the law.
Do you commit to rejecting changes that demonize or delegitimize Israel?
Yes.
And do you commit to ensuring that the study abroad program affirms the Jewish people's right to self-determination?
Yes, I believe self-determination and the right for Israel to exist is a primary function.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. Obviously, and you've heard this over and over, we're all extremely troubled by the anti-Semitic activities occurring on college campuses across the country. Our country's made tremendous strides in hopefully getting along with our friends from all over the world, and our institutions of higher education seem to be serving as breeding grounds for anti-Semitic activities. This anti-Semitic rhetoric has reached institutions beyond just the so-called elite schools like Columbia or Harvard, which we questioned some time ago. As I stated before, as the oldest and most established democracy in the region, Israel exemplifies the core values of freedom and democracy. Jerusalem is the center of the universe. A lot of people think Washington is, but that's where it's going to happen. And of course, you know, for those who are familiar with the Bible, a book of the Word of God, Genesis 12:3 states, "I will bless those who bless you," talking about Israel, "and whoever curses you, I will curse." And that is a serious issue. In fact, it also goes on to say that all nations will be blessed through Israel. In fact, in John 4:22, Jesus said salvation, even for Gentiles, will come through the Jews. And so, Dr. Paul, you know, this is a serious issue we're talking about. In fact, it has eternal consequences. DePaul President Dr. Robert Manuel, with that being said, the anti-Semitic extremist group behind enemy lines continues to trespass on DePaul's campus and harass Jewish students. This is the same group that made a wanted poster featuring a Jewish Israeli student at DePaul. In January, the group handed out flyers on campus that urged students to get dangerous. Then, just this past March, the group was able to infiltrate a DePaul building as part of its week of defiance. Dr. Manuel, were any arrests made in either of these instances?
Thank you for the question, Representative. Once we saw that post, we immediately trespassed BEL from our campus. We're an urban campus with many public streets and right-of-ways. We're working with our elected officials to see if there's not more we can do to stop the harassment of BEL against our students.
Were any of these students arrested?
Again, we kept BEL from being on our campus, and on a number of occasions where they were involved in protests, our relationship with CPD prevented them from coming onto our campus to engage our students.
So what are you doing to prevent this from happening again?
We are training our public safety officers. We're working with the aldermen, the elected officials in our area, to see if we can't get broader protections in the public space. And we continue to report things like you mentioned in the social media, both to the FBI and to the and to Chicago Police.
President Raymond, let's talk about restorative practices, a group to resolve disciplinary issues in your university. The directors of the group, Dr. Mon McHenry and Dr. Jill Stauffer, both publicly support the academic boycott of Israel. And Dr. McHenry is a member of the Haverford Faculty for Justice in Palestine, and in December 24 liked an Instagram post glorifying a member of the Popular Front of the Liberation of Palestine, a U.S.-designed terrorist organization with a history of murdering Jews, with the caption reading, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Would a Jewish student feel comfortable with Dr. McHenry leading restorative practice, giving her glorification of violence against Israel?
Representative, we are committed to supporting our entire Jewish community. We are proud of it, and intersections with all aspects of our disciplinary processes are ones that I take very seriously. They must be done well.
Well, it would seem that you would put into practice those things that, I mean, we're hearing, and it's been, the testimony is correct about what's going on these campuses, but, you know, the action that we're hearing, you know, like I said, we got to fix this. And so with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Utah, Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is really unfortunate that it's been over a year since our first hearing on anti-Semitism, a year and a half since October 7th, and we're still talking about rooting out anti-Semitism on our college campuses. The vision of our educational institutions from our very founding has been tied to the aspirations of our nation stated in the preamble of the Constitution to become a more perfect union. We are failing our kids. What are we getting instead? Students graduating with enormous debt, knowing nothing about our country's history, culture, vision, or sacrifices. Students who are angry, lacking common sense and common decency toward anyone who looks different than them or holds a different opinion. Our educational institutions have become the feeding grounds for Marxists, an ideology that abhors our culture of faith, family, the free market, and wisdom through education. Young people who supposedly be our future leaders are being taught to hate America and hate Israel. And they have no shame in running around in gangs, hiding their faces as they burn and break other people's property. They intimidate, threaten, and attack people who they don't know because they've been taught to hate by their college professors. These cowardly bullies feel no threat about accountability because the adults in charge have empowered them to negotiate their anti-Semitic views on their terms. We're seeing too many words and too little action. As an observation, as someone who grew up in the Deep South, 1960s Jim Crow Deep South, the KKK would have loved the environment that we're now seeing on too many of our colleges. And many of them would have graduated with honors. With our new administration, the majority in the House and the Senate, this is going to come to a screeching halt. Accountability is back. Dr. Raymond, Harvard's social honor code, which students are required to pledge to commit, states that the acts of discrimination, microaggression, and harassment, including and not limited to acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, which I have no idea what that is, tokenism, cultural insensitivity, discrimination based on citizenship status, discrimination based on religion, and discrimination based on natural origin, accent, dialect, or usage of the English language are devoid of respect and therefore, by definition, violate this code. First of all, Doctor, who made up this code? Who's the authors of this code of conduct?
Our honor code, which is both governing our social action and academics at Haverford, is written by students and approved by students.
Sounds like it.
And I
thank you.
then
Thank you.
take responsibility.
Sounds like students that have been taught how to be Marxists, by the way. This part of this here is the uses of the English language. Is that now a form of discrimination? I see this in the code. The usage of the language, English language. What does that have to do with the code of conduct?
We are actively revising that code to better meet the moment.
All right. They also state that Harvard students commit to being actively anti-racist and particularly commit to rejecting anti-blackness, recognizing white privilege, challenging structures of whiteness and white comfort, and crediting the work of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and especially women of color. So are Jewish people considered white privilege by chance?
We do not tolerate any discrimination or bias at the college, and as I said, that code is under active revision.
I would suggest that you put somebody in charge that are adults, all right? Because obviously this is from folks who've been trained how to hate, and now it's becoming a policy of the college, which should not be acceptable. Dr. Manuel, first of all, I'm impressed with the actions you're saying you're going to take. We look forward to following up on that. I think part of the problem is what's the teaching that's going on in between. You have someone, Taryn Webb, who made this, some very appalling statements about Jewish people. Says this historical fact that American Jewish immigrants have always been the foundational building block for white supremacist infrastructure in this country. He also said the state of Israel, much like U.S., is facilitating a white supremacist racial caste. Let me just say this, leadership has to figure out how to get rid of this rot within your colleges. It's great to say these great things, but if you have people that hate our kids and hate each other and teach that, it's not going to change. We'll have to address it on the federal level. We can't change it on your area. Okay, so with that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. President Raymond, despite your opening statement that you condemn anti-Semitism, multiple Jewish students on the campus you preside over report feeling ostracized for the sole fact they're Jewish. Do you think Haverford still has an anti-Semitic problem?
Representative, I know that the effects of what has happened at Haverford have been very concerning to me and to many of our Jewish students, staff, and faculty. It's been a troubling time for many of us, and we are working to combat anti-Semitism.
Okay. Well, other than describing as it being anti-Semitic, how else would you describe a campus where a Jewish student wrote, the multiple classmates have refused to speak to me after learning I'm Jewish? Or how could you possibly interpret signs at a protest that say decolonization is not a metaphor? Those Harvard faculty and students participating in these acts are sending a clear message to the Jewish student body or any student with ties to Israel: you're not welcome here, and extermination of Israel and the Jewish people who have sought refuge there is our goal. This is a very serious matter. One student said they felt safer in Israel, which is a combat zone, than attending your school in the fall. They wrote, I'm scared, I'm not going to learn, and I'm not going to be safe. President Raymond, are you comfortable with Haverford driving away Jewish students who have been accepted admission, or are you going to establish more useless listening sessions and ad hoc committees while putting out bland statements approved by lawyers to cover your legal obligations? Is that really what Jewish students at Haverford deserve?
What you read, Representative, pains me deeply. Those experiences of our Haverford students are not experiences that they should have on our campus or anywhere. And I commit to the work of this campus to making it a much more welcoming place for all of our Jewish students and staff and faculty.
Thank you. Are protests calling for the genocides of Jews a violation of your university's rules or code of ethics? And if they are, and such statements are made, what is the repercussion for students or faculty that make them?
Such calls are horrific and absolutely not acceptable anywhere in the world. No such calls have been made at Haverford College. Any such calls would be, of course, followed up immediately with all of our disciplinary processes.
And what would that discipline be?
The discipline would be what that process would eventually call for.
All right. Dr. Manuel, how about at your university? If there's a protest calling for the genocide of Jews, what would be the replication for a student or faculty that made them?
Thank you, Representative. Anybody who would make those kind of statements for the genocide or killing of anybody would be immediately brought in, put through our adjudication processes. The result could be anything up to and including expulsion.
Okay. Dr. Armstrong, same thing?
Yes, sir. Anyone calling for the death of any group or harassing or discriminating would be subject to discipline.
And what would that discipline be?
Well, for students, it could be suspension, it could be, if repeated, expulsion, and then we also have procedures for our faculty and staff that could result in discipline.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Manuel, instead of checking IDs for protesters that are wearing masks, why don't you prohibit the wearing of masks for those that are protesting? Well, how is that part of their free speech rights?
Thank you. We have people on our campus who are immunocompromised, folks who have religious beliefs. We wanted to accommodate that. We also wanted to prevent people from evading identification during critical moments on campus. What I mentioned in my ID masking policy that we adopted is part of the larger culture of creating accountability, the changes in our time, place, and manner, the additional 30% spend on our public safety, the bringing in of the ADL expert to help with Jewish engagement. Together, they represent a change to action in the way that we hold ourselves accountable to our community.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all being here, and I'll yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. It is abundantly clear that the cynical work of the majority party on this committee is now being expanded and weaponized by the administration seeking to squash dissent. We are seeing the heavy hand of the state through this administration and the body being brought down against students and faculty for engaging in protected speech. We saw this in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, who on March 8th became one of the first student activists to be detained by ICE, despite not being criminally charged and despite the agents lying about having a warrant. We saw this in the case of Mohsen Mahwadi, who was abducted by ICE at a citizenship naturalization interview for his role in campus protest. We saw this in the case of Romeza Ozturk, who was accosted in broad daylight by a group of masked and unidentified agents after writing a critical article in her student newspaper last year. And there have been more. Georgetown professor Badar Khan Suri, PhD candidate Ranjani Srinivasan, a 21-year-old student Yunsan Jang, and many more. Political protests, anti-war protests, pro-Palestinian protests, this is all protected speech under the First Amendment, regardless of citizenship status. Using immigration authorities to target, abduct, and illegally detain non-citizens for their activism is clear violation of their rights and a hallmark of an authoritarian government. As Mahmoud Khalil wrote, from inside the Louisiana Detention Center, where he remained for 60 days. Who has the right to have rights? And as Mohsen Mahwadi wrote after being freed from detention, when they look at my case, all Americans should ask themselves, what is left of our democracy and who will be targeted next? In 1987, almost 40 years ago, 8 immigrants in Los Angeles were arrested as a result of their pro-Palestinian activism, in a shockingly similar circumstances as the arrests and the abductions by ICE that we are seeing today. Professor Cole, you legally represented the LA 8 for 20 years against the US government. After the charges were dismissed, the judge called the proceedings an embarrassment to the rule of law. What similarities have you seen between that Cold War era case and the cases we are seeing today? And what findings were made at the time regarding the First Amendment rights of non-citizens?
Thank you for that question. There are many parallels. The charges actually against the group of Palestinian students back then, the initial charges were being advocates of world communism. So the McCarthyism trope was used against them at that time. We challenged that provision of the McCarran-Walter Act in court, arguing that all people in the United States have First Amendment rights, whether you're a citizen or a non-citizen. The Supreme Court has said even corporations have speech rights because the First Amendment protects speech, not speakers. And the court agreed and struck down that provision of the McCarran-Walter Act, saying all persons, including foreign nationals in this country, have the same First Amendment rights. Mahmoud Khalil has the same First Amendment rights. Badar Khan Suri has the same First Amendment rights. And yet, this administration is targeting them for nothing more than speaking out in ways that the administration disagrees with. That is contrary to the core principle of the First Amendment, in the same way that the effort to use charges of anti-Semitism to target universities and try to micromanage how they discipline particular incidents is contrary to the core conception of the First Amendment.
Mr. Cole, it is refreshing, Professor Cole, it's refreshing to have a witness who understands the illegitimate McCarthy-like approach the majority is taking on this committee. For them, it is easy to target people's rights to speech and to assemble when they advocate for Palestine. It is easy to dismiss the rights of those who are not yet citizens. Professor Cole, from your decades of experience as First Amendment scholar and champion, does it ever stop at the easy targets?
No, it doesn't stop at the easy targets. And you can, again, look back at McCarthyism. It was targeted at a problem. There were communists in this country that were spying for our enemy. But that's not what the McCarthyism was about. It was not about identifying those spies. It ultimately reached millions of Americans who were subjected to investigations. People lost their jobs, were blacklisted, merely for their ideas.
The gentlelady's time's expired.
Yeah. And I will say, those who don't learn from history repeat it. So thank you so much.
I thank the gentlelady. Now I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
President Raymond, there's a professor on your faculty, Professor Mendelsohn, is that correct?
Yes.
He's an Israeli professor, and he has posted that Haverford College's student body is led by Hamas apologists and tainted by anti-Semitism. He said, if I'm a parent of a Jewish student, I will not send them to Haverford College. Do you think there is reality reflected in his sentiments?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Do
his sentiments reflect a reality on that campus?
I think that Professor Mendelsohn has the right to express himself as he wishes, and I do not think that that expresses the overall reality at Haverford.
Was he investigated by your administration?
I will not talk about individual investigations.
Okay, I'm not asking you the content of the investigation. I'm saying yes or no, was this professor investigated?
I will not talk about whether an individual...
I think we'll take that as a yes. You have professors who are making anti-Semitic comments, who are inciting violence. Rather than investigate them, you investigate the Israeli professor who is calling attention to the horrors that are taking place on the campus. There was an incident in 2024 where you had posters for Chabad events, for other events of the Jewish community, for anti-Semitism events that disappeared, and you said this was from benign mechanisms, and you said it was the wind. Was it the wind that caused the posters to come down?
We do not tolerate any discrimination or bias.
That was nowhere close to my question. Was it the wind that caused these posters to come down? Like you said it was?
When posters are taken down intentionally, not by the wind, then that would be anti-Semitism.
An odd kind of wind that only goes after one particular type of poster. There was also an event on your campus that you've acknowledged by the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, that was disrupted at an event specifically designed to counter anti-Semitism. You had anti-Semites that came and disrupted it. And apparently the only thing you had them do was write a letter of apology. Is that correct?
Having that disruption of that anti-Semitism awareness event was not acceptable and a horrible moment.
And so all they had to do was write a letter of apology. There was also, apparently, donuts were going to be ordered for commencement from a Jewish bakery. A group of anti-Semites on campus asked for a boycott, saying, say no to blood donuts. Did you abide by their calls for a boycott?
We purchased and enjoyed those donuts.
Did the students receive the donuts?
They were eaten at commencement.
They were eaten. That's an odd passive voice.
Pardon me.
Did the students
Pardon
get
me.
any?
They were available at commencement.
To students?
Yes, they were available during the commencement.
Okay, to students. We also had a takeover of Founders Hall take place on your campus, and you said that you negotiated with those who were involved in this, didn't you?
I had conversations with those students when we brought that to a close.
Students who physically took over this building, and in fact, you said that the only punishment, the only consequences for them were restorative, not punitive action. Is that right? Restorative, not punitive?
When that disruption disrupted our campus activities, according to our policies and our practices, we closed that off, and it ended.
There was also an anti-Semitism awareness basketball game that was organized, but the organizers were told that this might prove too antagonistic to the pro-Palestinian students, and the game didn't happen. Is that correct?
We are committed to fighting anti-Semitism.
Wasn't the question. Was the game canceled? Were the students told that it would be too antagonistic to pro-Palestinian students?
That is not what happened.
Can you look, would you be able right now to look the parents of a prospective Jewish student in the eye and assure them that their son or daughter would feel safe and welcome on your campus?
I can assure all applicants to Haverford College that we are a place that promotes inclusion and belonging for all.
But would you be able to look at parents of a prospective Jewish student and say your son or daughter would feel safe and welcome on my campus?
Yes, I would.
But this is all, Mr. Cole, just McCarthyism to you, right? You've testified, you've likened our committee's anti-Semitism investigation to the House Un-American Activities Committee. Is that right?
That's absolutely right.
Have you forgotten the hearing with, say, the Columbia president, where during her testimony there was an illegal encampment that had taken over that campus? The House Un-American Activities Committee's problem was that it was dredging up distant affiliations, real or imagined, in order to impugn people. Nothing could be more different than what's going on. I don't know if you've talked to the students at places like Haverford or Harvard or Northwestern or UCLA who are afraid to wear a Star of David, are afraid to wear a yarmulke, are afraid to express their identity in any way because they'll be ostracized, they'll be subject to discrimination, to potentially acts of violence, who have to face checkpoints from anti-Semitic lunatics on the campus, not letting them even access public facilities or cross the quad. Nothing could be more different. This is a shocking problem that has engulfed much of higher education and had been building for many years, but in particular over the last year and a half. And I simply cannot believe that you would say that the Democrat witness from the ACLU would come here and liken this to McCarthyism. We have a long way to go in reforming higher education. I yield back.
Can I respond?
I thank the gentleman from...
Do I get to respond or no?
Did the gentleman respond?
The gentleman can respond when he's given the opportunity. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Mr. Cole, I want to give you a chance to respond on my time, and I just want to agree with your sentiment. And I'm taken by the comment in that point of history, have you no shame? And sorry, he's leaving. That's just shameless behavior, so I'll give you a few minutes to explain.
I guess he didn't want to hear the answer.
Apparently. Yeah. So go ahead. If you need more time, it's on me.
So the answer is, of course there's a problem with anti-Semitism, there's a problem with Islamophobia, there's a problem with racism, there's a problem with sexism. This hearing, this set of hearings that this committee has engaged in is not a solution to that problem, just as there was a problem with communist spies. We now have evidence that there were, in fact, communist spies. But the McCarthy era and the HUAC hearings were not about that. They were about bringing people in, condemning them, not looking into the facts, but making broad accusations. And I've heard that again here today, again and again, lumping together criticism of Israel, which is protected speech, with anti-Semitism. Criticism of Zionism, which is protected speech, with anti-Semitism. No effort to discern the difference between protected speech and discrimination. Our Constitution requires that we make that distinction. This committee has not made any effort to make that distinction. That's why I draw the comparison to HUAC.
No, and I completely agree with you. And that comment to Senator McCarthy at that time, I think, is appropriate today. After all this, sir, do you have no shame? Because I actually think it makes a higher risk for violence on the campuses. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. And we did ultimately recognize that Joe McCarthy made a mistake, and I think history will show that this committee followed and repeated that same mistake.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate it. President Armstrong, I want to talk about what we've done in California and the University of California system that some of my colleagues are anxious to criticize. In your instance, as a member of the Transportation Committee, you're getting people out to help us spend that money that we did in the Biden administration to provide valuable resources to the economy and transportation. You have one of the highest returns on investment for students. When your graduates get out, they go out to work and make a good return on investment. So thank you for that, and you've done really good work on this instance. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters from students and organizations at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, which speak positively about President Armstrong's leadership and atmosphere the school has created for Jewish students. I'd ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to submit those to the record.
Without objection, to be submitted.
So can you follow up on your work with local police who have jurisdiction over this at Cal Poly that's been successful to protecting all of your students, particularly Jewish students?
Yes, thank you for that question. We work very hard to make sure all students have a safe learning environment. We want to make sure they're free from harassment and discrimination, but we also balance that with free speech. So our university police partner with off-campus, the city police, in a very positive way. First, we make sure that our students who have invited speakers or departments, that it is done properly and everyone is safe. So that's with our time, place, and manner rules. And then we have a great relationship with the city. They provide aid. We also support them. So I appreciate that question.
Thanks. Mr. Cole, I want to ask you a question. In the area I represent, Region 9 in San Francisco is being cut back, all the departments, but the Department of Education. So its ability to defend vulnerable students, could you speak to that? If you don't have the staff in the regions, what does that do to potential violence or protections for interest to the disabled community?
Well, it decimates the ability, the real ability of government to try to protect Jewish students. And if this committee really cared about Jewish students, it would be condemning the Department of Education. It would be bringing in the secretary, as I suggested earlier, and saying, why are you cutting in half the Office of Civil Rights? We have a problem with anti-Semitism. We have a problem with racism. We have a problem with sexism. Let's deal with the problem. But instead, the committee brings in presidents, dredges up allegations that have not been determined to be true or false, and just throws them out as if that's somehow solving the problem. It's not solving the problem in any way, shape, or form. What would solve the problem?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Calling the Secretary of Education here.
Thank you. This has been hard to sit through. And for all the Jews that are out there, I want to apologize to you because it's been tough for me listening to a lot of the repulsive and repugnant commentary that's been made both in those asking questions and those answering them. But God puts us where he wants us to be. My 17-year-old this morning told me to wear my kippah, which I don't do often, but that may change, in honor of all of the students at these campuses that don't feel safe to wear it themselves. And for anyone who doubts my commitment to fighting on these issues, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, they can go talk to the 2 chairmen of the board and the 1 university president in Florida who no longer have their jobs because of me. So I encourage you to keep that in mind when you answer my questions. I think we heard a lot of lip service here. And Mr. Cole talked about the importance of free speech and equal access to education. So I'm going to start with those questions with Dr. Raymond. Dr. Raymond, and I encourage you, this may be happening right now. If a student is on your campus right now with a sign that says, "No blacks on campus," what will happen to that student?
Representative Fine, I first want to say that
I don't want to hear that. I want you to answer my question. A student on your campus right now, walking around campus saying no blacks on campus, what will happen to that student? They're just allowed to walk around, good job, free speech, we love that. Is that what would happen on your campus?
no,
Okay, good. Would they be invited to go get an education somewhere else, which is what I hope the answer is?
it would be the same as someone who is inappropriately
Would they
and
be
repugnantly-
kicked out of campus if a student walked around your campus saying, no blacks on campus? Or would we like sit around a drum circle and talk about how great it is? What would happen? Would they be kicked off? Or is that free speech at Haverford College? No blacks on campus?
Representative Fine, there is no room for discrimination or
But there
hate
is room,
at
because at your
Haverford.
campus, in front of you, at a protest, students held up a sign saying no Zionists on campus. They said, and there was no consequence for that, and you were at that event, and it happened on September 30th, 2024. You were there. My second question I'm going to go to, do you believe the Jews are responsible for COVID? Is that some sort of conspiracy that we came up with to go after people? The Jewish students on your campus and professors were responsible for COVID and it was like unleashed on people? Is that what you believe?
Of course it's
Okay,
not.
then why did you say when a group, a terrorist group, wanted to have a presentation called COVID in Times of Genocide, how Israel uses COVID as a tool for settler colonialism in Palestine, your response to that name was that it was thoughtful and considerate. See, we can talk about what other people did. I'm interested in what you did, and in both of these instances, you're the one that did it. So do you think that title, COVID in Times of Genocide, how Israel uses COVID as a tool for settler colonialism in Palestine, was that thoughtful and considerate? Do you still believe that today?
I did not say that about that title, and I do not believe that today. And Zionists are welcome on our campus, and Zionists are Jews and not Jews. And to go back to your other point, we do not tolerate discrimination against.
Well, then let's get on to that. Since Zionists are welcome on your campus, we will now talk about a professor that is on your campus. And I may actually give some of my time to Mr. Cole on this one, because he talked about equal access to education. You have a professor named Guangtian Ha, and I apologize, who said in August of 2024, the only way to deal with Zionists is to stop talking to them and refuse to let them waste your time. Now, I don't know what Professor Ha teaches, but I would assume there are some students in his class that are actually Zionists. So would it reduce their access to education if their professor publicly says, I should stop talking to Zionists and I should not waste my time on them? How is that acceptable on your campus?
Discrimination of any form is not acceptable.
Okay, so does he still work on your campus? Does he still work there?
Yes, he does.
He does. And he also said something that said, the state of Israel must be dismantled and society denazified. Zionism is Nazism, is fascism. Zionisms are racists. And that's okay. And you can continue to work on your campus when you make those statements. That's okay. Keep the job.
Those statements are repugnant, and I do not defend those statements.
But you do, because here's the last one I'm going to do. You had a graduate student. Let's see if I can find it here. You had a graduate student who, before he was hired, made a statement. Can I find it here? The problem with your place is there's so many. October 7th, 2023, you had a visiting assistant professor write, October 7th was a beautiful sight to wake up to this morning, end quote. And after this person made this statement, your school offered them another position in June of 2024. Why would you hire someone who says that October 7th was a beautiful sight to wake up to? Why would you hire that person?
I am very sorry that I had someone on the faculty that would espouse those kinds of views.
Good, you can go back and you can fire him. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I would ask to submit for the record the most recent ADL campus anti-Semitism card that includes a report card that includes the 3 universities here, as well as others, including some that have been in front of us, where if it is conjecture that this committee and our activities with hearings are not having an impact, we'll see that there has been impact in better grades that are coming on for some, still terrible grades for others. So without objection, I submit this for the record. I now recognize the gentlelady from Michigan. Ms. Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to give the first, 15, 20 seconds to Mr. Cole to finish your last thought from the previous question, if you wanted to.
From which question?
From Mr. Desagnier.
I'm not even remembering.
Okay, well, that's good.
I think I
I think the committee wanted to make sure you could finish your thought, but if it's been finished.
I think I've said what I need to say about the analogies between this committee's work and HUAC's committee's work, and I think history will reflect that is exactly the analogy that we should draw.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all agree that combating anti-Semitism is a nonpartisan issue and needs to be treated as such. And this is now the fourth or fifth committee hearing that we've held on this topic of anti-Semitism on our college campuses. And I don't believe it is a false obsession. We know in the United States of America that we have rising anti-Semitism, and it's actually exploding. Dr. Raymond, it was nice to hear you say that Zionists are welcome on campus. Whether a Zionist is a Jewish student or a non-Jewish student, that is important to hear, that is important to say, and even displaying that more prominently, I think for all of you, it would be certainly welcome. I am myself a Zionist, and I am not Jewish, and I am proud of that designation. Now, there might be some people who are not Zionists, and maybe you're going to say that non-Zionists are welcome as well. Anti-Zionists are welcome. And one of the challenges that those of us who have studied this issue have come across is that while it might sound good to say that non-Zionist, anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, we haven't yet really seen that exist. And so we want to be very careful with embracing this modality of thinking that is anti-Zionism that very quickly bleeds into anti-Semitism. And the other thing that we want to respect and recognize is universities as places of free thought and deep thinking. I myself have a master's in philosophy. I did graduate this century, that's nice. But in a different time, where this level of anti-Semitism wasn't at its boiling point. And we're having experiences from the Jewish community in particular, even pre-10/7, where we knew it was difficult for students Jewish students to be on college campuses. And after 10/7, it became, on some of the campuses, very difficult. And students, we had testimony in another, it was a type of hearing that we had, where a student said he's wearing his yarmulke, he's raised by a single mother in Brooklyn, openly Jewish, had never been to Israel, and is now being attacked on his college campus. We all have to ask ourselves why that is happening. And we have to do the work to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, I also want to devote my energy and my time as a member of Congress who cares. I'm a co-chair of the Anti-Semitism Task Force, so I do deeply care about this issue tremendously. And I'm going to reflect on another period of hearing that we had where we shared the mental health resources that get made available to college campuses. And we had a couple of terms ago, when the Democrats were in the majority, a hearing about this. And we were going to allocate more mental health resources onto college campuses. And a colleague from the other side of the aisle put in an amendment that said if you're gay, you can't access these mental health resources. Now, I don't know why that would happen. I don't know why that was a vote we had to take in this committee hearing. And I found that really biased and lacking in inclusion. And so to your point, Mr. Cole, about taking very seriously what our colleges need to combat hate, to combat anti-Semitism, we need a civil rights office and we need a functioning Department of Education. And so thank you to everybody in the audience who's here as well wearing their yellow pins. I'm also the co-chair of the Hostage Task Force. We need to bring the hostages home. We need to see this war come to an end, and Hamas needs to surrender. With that, Mr. Chair, thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Onder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for coming to the committee today. Ms. President Raymond, as you mentioned in your testimony on September 30th, 2024, the Anti-Defamation League held a presentation on Haverford's campus entitled Antisemitism 101. Unfortunately, many of your students decided to disrupt the event, for example, by chanting through a megaphone, "From Gaza to Lebanon, Israel will soon be gone, banging pots and pans, and holding signs with statements including "No Zionists" on campus. President Raymond, yes or no, do you believe that is an incident of intimidating Jewish students and an incident of anti-Semitism?
I do believe that is an act of intimidation, yes.
Okay. And, you know, I understand that it's not necessarily anti-Semitic to condemn particular aspects of Israeli foreign policy, but in context, would you agree that using the term Zionist in that context, it's a synonym for Jew?
I am committed to supporting our Jewish community.
Do you think those protesters knew the foreign policy views of every Jewish student on campus? I mean, in context, no Zionists on campus, no Republicans on campus, no libertarians on campus. I don't think they're talking about Jews. They're talking no Jews on campus is what those protesters mean.
The representative before me and I said also myself that Zionists, and I think you know this too, that our Zionists are Jews and not Jews. And we do not accept discrimination against anyone at Haverford.
Were any students involved in that incident disciplined? Were any expelled, suspended, or otherwise subject to discipline?
We did put through discipline some of the students that were involved in disrupting that event. And we learned from that event to have clearer policies, which we now have, on what it means to disrupt through noise outside an event.
Can you give us numbers of how many students were disciplined and in what ways?
I will not give numbers or specifics.
Yeah, you were similarly evasive with Chairman Wahlberg, but your colleagues gave us numbers. Why are you not? Can you cite a federal law that doesn't allow you to do so, or are you more ethical than they are because you're protecting students' privacy better? We're not asking for names. We're not asking for social security numbers or dates of birth. We're asking for numbers.
My top priority is the safety and well-being of our students.
You're not going to give us the information.
We follow all of our disciplinary practices, which can, depending on what has happened, result in suspension or expulsion when appropriate.
So, President Raymond, last year, when Jewish community leaders pressed Haverford DI Administrator, this is Nikki Young, VP for Institutional Equity and Access and Professor of Gender Studies, when they asked her about the anti-Semitic climate on campus, she is quoted as saying, "Blacks and gays have in the past not felt safe on campus. It is now the turn of Jewish students to experience that feeling." Were you aware of her making that statement?
That is not a statement that she made.
She didn't.
No, she didn't. And that does not sound like the Dr. Young that I know, who is committed against anti-Semitism, as am I.
If someone made such a statement, should they be fired?
We follow when any such statement that is discriminatory.
If someone
or
made such a
biased,
statement, should they be suspended?
we would follow our practices and have as a consequence an appropriate outcome.
If such a statement was made, should they be fired, suspended, or disciplined in some other way? Are such statements unacceptable at Haverford?
Statements of discrimination and harassment are unacceptable.
Fine. I suppose it's your First Amendment right to be evasive, but it's also our right to decide that such institutions are not deserving of taxpayer money. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our nation is undoubtedly at an inflection point, politically, culturally, socially. And college campuses have always been the place where those tensions collide more visibly and more profoundly than almost anywhere else in our country. And it's precisely because of that role that these institutions play in our society. Throughout history, college campuses have been the places where worldviews, politics, cultures meet. Students are introduced to ideas and thoughts. Some they accept and agree with, and others they vehemently disagree with, but it's where they encounter ideas that test their values, where they're pushed out of their comfort zones, and where they begin to define not just what they think, but who they are and who they want to be. Some of the most transformative movements for justice in this country were ignited by students on college campuses, from the sit-ins of the civil rights movement and the anti-war demonstrations to campaigns against South African apartheid and the many other student-led movements for racial, gender, and economic justice. Those movements didn't just happen to take place on campuses. They happened because of what those campuses seek to foster: spaces for critical thinking, opportunities for students to learn, to meet with diverse people, to be empowered, and to question existing social and societal structures. Students won't get everything right, and we should all unequivocally say that anti-Semitism, anti-Blackness, Islamophobia, homophobia, and any form of hatred are not acceptable ways to engage on a college campus, in movement spaces, in activism, or in any other existing place in our societies. Students won't get everything right. And we should also say unequivocally, but we should also recognize that discomfort is sometimes having your worldview questioned, and it's sometimes conflated as being a threat to safety. There are differences. We all have a right to critique and disagree with the policies and actions of governments. It is in the Constitution. Students have a right to protest and advocate on behalf of Palestinian existence, rights, and self-determination, just as students have the right to protest and advocate on behalf of Israel. But now, that tradition of protest, academic freedom, and the core principle of free speech is under attack, not genuinely in the name of safety or student well-being, but under the guise of control used to suppress the voices of marginalized groups and criminalize dissent. The colleges and universities before us today have a dual obligation to both ensure the safety of their students from anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, while allowing critical discourse to continue. Suppressing students' right to protest is an entry point for the erosion of civil liberties, and that's how democracies die. And that brings us to why we're here today. The majority in this committee convened us because they, even if people who really are impacted by this, but they are further villainizing higher education while using Jewish students and anti-Semitism as a scapegoat. So I have a question. It is imperative that we create a campus environment that is diverse, inclusive, safe, equitable, without compromising free speech and academic freedom. Mr. Cole, do you agree that that universities can and must do both?
Absolutely. They can and must do both. In some instances where there are state universities, they are compelled by the Constitution to respect free speech and not treat every anti-Semitic comment as discrimination, because most of them are protected speech. And on private universities that are not bound by the Constitution, many, and indeed most of them, have adopted free speech policies precisely for the reasons you suggest, that it is critical to an education. And for years, conservatives complained about universities not being open enough, not being tolerant enough condemning speech which was only racist or only sexist. And now suddenly they've switched entirely.
And if I may, to add to that, every student deserves to be safe and have their humanity recognized. This administration has done nothing toward that end. If they actually cared about campus safety and protecting students, then in addition to acknowledging the real rise in anti-Semitism, we'd also be talking about the rise in Islamophobia and the persistent anti-Blackness, the degradation of rights of trans students. Since my tenure, we've had 0 hearings, resolutions, or acknowledgments of any of the many intertwined ills that plague our college campuses in larger society. So has anyone, just a yes or no, has anyone on this committee, from the majority on our committee, has anyone from the Trump administration asked you about racist, Islamophobic, or homophobic incidents on your campus, yes or no? Probably not, just for time. I would say they probably have not, because what has become clear is that the concern here is selective, only appearing when it can be weaponized for political gain. Instead, what we're seeing is a deliberate effort to divide marginalized people. My colleagues are weaponizing, attempts to weaponize learning as transparent and pathetic. It is clear that my colleagues' real issues with free speech and education, not anti-Semitism. We shouldn't fall for it. It's clear that they don't care about it because they've dismantled and closed regional office for the Office of Civil Rights, where we are tasked with investigating anti-Semitism. That they have not spoken out against the Nazi salutes of Elon Musk, or the Great Replacement theory that led to the largest anti-Semitic massacre in my district in the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, that they have done nothing about anti-Blackness. I won't hold my breath for a hearing on that. That we haven't acknowledged that our safety and our liberation is tied together. That is not actually student safety that they care about. We have to fight back against our attempts to erode our civil liberties. We cannot allow them to use efforts to divide our marginalized communities against each other in that fight. We are the closest we have ever been to losing our civil liberties. We have to fight against it.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate today's hearing on stopping the spread of anti-Semitism on American campuses, because we do see a very real problem that is occurring all across the country. Anti-Semitism has been around for a long time, but ever since October 7th, it has come out into the light in a much more shocking and offensive fashion, particularly on our university campuses. And when it presents itself, we appreciate that some of the university presidents are willing to identify those situations and call them out. And when discrimination like this goes through a process that you have on your campus, and a violation is determined that it has actually occurred, appropriate punishment is being meted out. That's important that we recognize that as well. But then accountability for us as legislators is making sure that those institutions that actually go through that process recognize the discrimination that is occurring on their campus, hand out punishment. We want to make sure that that is actually the course of events that's playing out. During the course of this testimony today, 2 of the university presidents have been very transparent with the aggregate information that they were willing to share about the punishments that were handed out on their university campus. One was not. One has evaded that conversation a number of times, saying that she was unable to provide that information. Under pressured testimony, twice though, you have acknowledged that punishment has occurred. So you have violated your own standard that you would not disclose or discuss any punishments that were occurring on your university campus. So my question to you, to the President, Dr. Raymond from Haverford College, is will you go back to your college campus, collect that aggregate information, we don't need any personal information, and share it with this committee about the punishments that have been handed out from your university to students or others who were involved in this discriminatory practice on your college campus?
Representative McKenzie, I appreciate your requesting that, and I can commit to our practices around this. We do not share our results of our disciplinary processes on our campus or publicly.
And that's a problem. So that is a problem. You do receive federal money, do you not? In some way, either directly or indirectly through student loans or grants to your university.
We do, in a wonderful partnership with the federal government.
Well, that partnership may be in jeopardy, because if you will not provide transparency and accountability like your other colleagues here, it calls into question your actions on your campus. And so when people are concerned about discrimination that is happening on your college campus, which the list is pretty long at this point, it's very concerning the amount of incidents that have piled up at your college campus under your tenure, and yet you won't share any information about the punishment that has been handed out when discrimination that you acknowledge has happened on your campus, you won't share that anybody has actually been punished for that.
Representative, the effects of what have happened at Haverford on our Jewish students and community are real and deeply troubling to me, and I am in this work, committed to getting it right. We have had many policy changes since October 7th in order to do this work better than we were able to do then. And I commit to that work on an ongoing basis with deep empathy and care for all of our Jewish students, staff, and faculty.
I appreciate that statement, but it is lacking in transparency and accountability about the end results of punishment that are handed out to students and faculty that are on your campus that participate in discriminatory actions. That should just be a baseline for receiving federal funding. You're willing to acknowledge that discriminatory actions have happened on your campus. You're willing to say that we are going to take some kind of action when that does occur. You're going to go through a process, but then you won't actually show those of us that are responsible for providing federal funding that you have actually done anything at the end of the day. So that is a very concerning course of action, and I think it's something that Congress should probably look into, saying that there needs to be transparency, there needs to be accountability, and those institutions that don't want to provide that and want to be evasive in remarks before Congress, want to avoid transparency and accountability in their actually publishing of the results of, in aggregate numbers, the fact that they have taken action against discriminatory behavior. I think that probably warrants a further investigation. The Department of Education should be looking into that, and ultimately, they should be withholding funds from somebody who does not want to provide transparent and accurate information about how they are handling discrimination on their college campus. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Raymond, how many Americans were killed on October 7th?
I don't know.
Dr. Raymond, how many?
There were some in Israel.
How many Americans were taken hostage on October 7th?
I know that some were. I do not know the number.
And do you know how many Americans are currently held hostage by Hamas?
No, I do not.
But you do condemn Hamas as a terrorist group?
Yes, I do.
Well, do you think you don't know these numbers because these American victims were Jewish?
Of course, that is not the reason.
Do you think there's been sufficient sympathy for the Jewish Americans who've been killed and taken hostage by Hamas on your campus?
We are all bereft around what happened on October 7th in Israel, and for all that were impacted, and it's a period. It is a horrific time in history.
Well,
and yes,
see,
we have
October 7th was the greatest terrorist attack on American citizens since 9/11, and yet you don't know how many Americans were killed, you don't know how many were taken hostage, and you have an anti-Semitism problem on your campus. So it's hard to conclude, and I appreciate that you come here today acknowledging that you yourself have personally made mistakes when it comes to anti-Semitism and that Haverford College has made mistakes, but those apologies ring a little hollow if we don't even know the basics of sympathy for how many American Jews were killed on October 7th. Now, you didn't write a letter or make a strongly worded statement after October 7th, is that correct?
I would like to say to your last question, my empathy and my deep sorrow is to all of the victims of that day. You asked me questions about Americans.
Did you make a strongly worded statement or something written after the attacks of October 7th?
Yes, I did.
You did. And you also made, I want to question whether you actually understand what anti-Semitism is. Could you define anti-Semitism?
Anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews.
Okay. Now, you did issue a statement very quickly after the protests and riots of January 6th, did you not?
I did.
You did, and in those, you
later.
described specifically the protesters on January 6th as being anti-Semitic. And in that same statement, did you not? I can read it to you if you'd like me to.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, I thought I heard January 6th.
Yeah, January 6th. So you didn't issue a very strongly worded statement after October 7th, but you did after January 6th, and you described the January 6th protesters at the nation's capital as anti-Semitic. And in that same statement, you also said that Black Lives Matter is a peaceful organization. Is that true? Do you see Black Lives Matter as a peaceful organization?
I think that I am being misquoted by what you said.
I'll read it to you. It says, incited by the president's words and parading explicitly anti-Semitic symbols, these rioters violently attempted to add another obstruction to the presidential election. You also said, many have noted the conduct of the Capitol Police and the contrast to the aggressive treatment of peaceful assemblies of Black Lives Matter protesters. So is Black Lives Matter Black Lives Matter a peaceful organization?
It is a nonviolent organization.
Was there any anti-Semitism exhibited by Black Lives Matter?
I am not aware of that.
So you're not aware the president of a university that does not know how many American Jews were killed on October 7th, and a president that does not know of any anti-Semitic behavior by Black Lives Matter. Are you aware that Black Lives Matter committed over $2 billion in damage? This is the organization that you describe as peaceful?
Representative, I may not know those facts that you have asked me about, and what I do know is that as president of Haverford College, I'm committed to creating...
See, what I think is that your apology rings hollow. I think it's politically convenient for you now to come cap in hand to when folks like Republicans are serious about anti-Semitism and you have federal funding on the line, you'll come here, and yet in your background, you have displayed behavior failing to significantly condemn the attacks of October 7th, not as a university president at a prestigious university, not being aware of the suffering that American Jews have suffered perhaps because they are Jewish, and then describing an anti-Semitic group like Black Lives Matter as a peaceful group, when anybody who even had turned on the television and watched the news knew that they were committing billions of dollars in damage and violence across this country and that they have deep anti-Semitic roots. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize now the gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Cole, if somebody issues statements which are critical of Islam as a religion, is that protected speech under the First Amendment?
Sure.
If a Christian minister attacks the gay lifestyle, is that protected speech under the First Amendment?
Yes.
Wow.
What, I'm sorry?
I said, wow. Okay. Thank you. Now, by the way, you got those answers right.
Thank you.
For you. I'd like to ask our professor something. I've had this job now for a little over 10 years, and I get around to all sorts of groups and talk to people. The number of people I talk to is just beyond belief. I have yet to hear, and I think I would have remembered if I heard it, any what I would call anti-Semitic remarks. Nevertheless, we seem to have a problem in all these universities in which anti-Semitism seems to be somewhat prevalent. Do you want to take a crack as to why anti-Semitism is, I think right now, tiny in the United States, but the only place it seems to be common is on university campuses?
Well, I don't.
Not you. We'll give the others. They're the experts. We're done with you, so that's.
Oh, I thought you said professor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you passed your test. Any of the other three want to take a crack as why we seem to have anti-Semitism on Americans' college campuses, but we don't have anti-Semitism at, from what I can tell, I talk to people all the time, not a big problem in America as a whole. Nobody has a reason why that is so. You must think when these incidents happens on your campuses, why is this happening? You don't think at all. Your mind is a blank. I guess your mind is a blank. You normally think of university presidents, mind is a blank, but apparently they are. It is my belief that the reason you see more anti-Semitism on campuses is because there is a lack of thought on the campuses, and the campuses are the home to the hard left of this country. And if there's a odd campus that is the home of the odd left, but we've got some presidents here of big, huge universities. I mean, DePaul, Cal Poly, big universities. But I think there is, for example, very little people who would be described as Christian conservatives or Republican. And I think that the Zigist of the more liberal element right now in this country is including anti-Semitism or a bizarre obsession with protecting Hamas. I guess I'll put it that way. Do you feel, do you say if you had to take a shot, we'll start out with Ms. Haverford here, or Ms. Raymond, Dr. Raymond. Do you have a crack of your professors, what percent you would think would vote for, say, a Donald Trump, and what percent would vote for a Kamala Harris or even further left-wing type candidate?
Representative, we do not ask.
You must have an
that
idea.
question
You must have an idea. You
of
talk
our
to people.
faculty.
You have no idea. No idea. We don't know. Maybe 80% were for Trump. You have no idea. Not even in the individual department you have any idea.
I do not, and I'm not interested in that kind
I
of
don't believe
information.
that, but okay, you can say that. How about Mr. Manuel?
Thank you. Like Haverford, we don't track.
I know you
We
don't
have
track,
about
but you must have an opinion. You talk to
1,200
people.
faculty on campus, and I can tell you that our practices have protected both conservative and progressive voices in our work.
You have no idea. Okay. Mr. Armstrong, I mean, you must talk to people. Everybody talks about the election last October. Do you feel you have kind of a angling to the left side big time on your campus there in California?
We have vast majority of our faculty and staff, they really focus on student success. We have a high STEM population.
Nobody wants to take a crack at it. Well, okay. I think the problem that we have anti-Semitism on the campus is because odd, offbeat, hateful ideas fester in a place of extreme leftism, and I think the universities in this country have become fanatical left-wingists, and I don't know what we can do about it as a country. We're going to have to talk and see what we can do about it, because we sure funnel money into the universities, and I don't think
the gentleman.
kids are getting
Time has
all
expired. Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you. Mr. Cole, can you say what the effect on effectively addressing anti-Semitism is when you ignore race, national origin, disability, gender, and other religion forms of hate?
Well, you're not addressing the problem in a neutral, across-the-board way, and that calls into question the genuineness of your concern for discrimination.
Thank you. You talked about the hearings like this being problematic because there's been no factual investigation. Jobs have been threatened. Can you say another word about why we need an actual investigation rather than hearings like this?
Yeah, the line between protected speech that is anti-Semitic and discrimination that is anti-Semitic is a hard line to draw. But it's a line that our Constitution compels us to draw. It's not a line that I've heard a single Republican care about on this committee, but it's a line that the Constitution requires us to draw. And how do you draw that line? You engage in close consideration of all the facts and circumstances around an incident. You don't just take a letter from a student, you call in the student, you call in other people who witnessed the incident. You determine what actually happened based on often competing accounts. And then you make a determination based upon those facts. That's what faculty committees do when they consider these kinds of complaints. That's what OCR did until it was decimated by this administration. That is not what I have seen this committee do in 8 hearings. I haven't seen them do that in a single instance. And instead, all they've done is bring in presidents and berate them based on the committee's version of the facts, which may or may not be true.
Thank you. And you've made the point that you have complain and blame without facts to cut back on Office of Civil Rights. Are you familiar with the Community Relations Service at Department of Justice?
Absolutely.
How could they be helpful?
They're helpful because they were designed to affirmatively, proactively get at discrimination by getting people to work together, by supporting, not by prosecuting, but by going in and affirmatively supporting areas and communities where there is division. That's what we need. We don't need, speechifying by Republicans. We need actual efforts on the ground to deal with the problem.
And of course, that's under attack, and in the president's budget, it seems to be left out.
Absolutely.
I would ask the presidents, the first question that was posed to you was something along the lines of, insofar as each of your campuses are hotbeds of anti-Semitism, can you give us some statistics? I forget what the rest of the question was. Each of you went right to the statistics and left us to assume that you agreed with the premise that your campuses were hotbeds of anti-Semitism. Anybody want to make a quick comment on whether or not that assumption is accurate?
That is not a description that I would use.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Manuel?
I would not use that description either, and I would note that our retention rates for Jewish students are up slightly over 5 years, as are our
well, I'm just talking about the question. You let it slide by. Dr. Armstrong?
No, I would not agree with that statement.
And Mr. Cole, in the last minute, can you just say a word about the tension between free speech and when it gets into, speech can get into criminal law, violation of Title VI, and possible campus code violations?
Again, the reason that Title VI has very high standards for when speech actually constitutes discrimination is because the Constitution protects all kinds of hateful speech. We can condemn that speech, we should condemn that speech, but we can't punish people for engaging in that speech. That's why Title VI says it's not discrimination to say something criticizing Israel at a protest. It is discrimination if you target a particular individual because of his Jewish identity for individually targeted harassment. And it's a violation of Title VI if the university is deliberately indifferent to that, meaning they ignore the problem. I haven't heard any evidence.
And what is a hostile environment?
Hostile environment is only where the speech is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it denies equal access to education, a standard that is extraordinarily high, has rarely been met in any case in this country. And again, it's because if you define discrimination through speech too broadly, you chill speech. And that is precisely what this effort of this committee has done, is to chill speech.
The
Speech
gentleman's
that
time has
criticizes
expired
Israel
again.
is protected.
And we will move on.
Thank you.
Mr. Cole, you've made your point pretty clear several times. So
Thank you.
I now recognize, I don't agree with it, but I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Rulli.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank all of you for coming. I know it can't be easy to be on that side. This is not a persecution. This is a learning curve, and I have to condemn the other side of the aisle that dilute the fact that this is about October 7th and anti-Semitism. I live about 38 miles away from Kent State University. We just had our observation of the anniversary of the shooting. The Boardman girl that was 18 that got killed shopped in my family's stores. It's very personal to us. In my political world and in my philosophy of life, we celebrate protesting. There is nothing wrong with protesting. It's what our country is based on by the founders. However, there's a difference between protesting and safety. And there's a difference between protesting and highlighting anti-Semitism. I think that, when we were raised, and we're all probably close to the same age bracket, when we were raised and we were in high school and we were in college, we heard a phrase calling, never again. But now the four of you are at the heights of power, and never again happens to be right now. And we all saw the videos on TV, on YouTube. They're there right now. I can pull them up on my phone. And Harvard Square, when I went to school at Emerson, so I was in Boston. I know Harvard Square really well, where literally Jewish kids were afraid to go to school, that were pushed on the ground, and they were harassed. Now, when I was in the Ohio Senate, I dealt with President Carter of the Ohio State University, and we had meetings with him before the protests, which he allowed to happen, which were very safe. Nobody was threatened. The campus was cleaned up, and I think the Palestinian protesters did a great job of their protesting. However, a lot of these universities throughout this country have not performed like that. So my focus goes to Dr. Manuel, and like I said, this is more of a learning curve. I don't want you to feel that we're here to persecute you, but I do want to do better. So when we look to Mr. Manuel, and we look at your university, and we look at the reflection on it, police reports have that 17-day encampment was allowed with over 1,000 submitted complaints, including reports of safety concerns, harassment concerns, threat of violence to Jewish students, and even several death threats. Individuals allegedly threatened to slit the throats of Jewish students supporting Israel. Allowed faculty members, if I'm saying her name right, Leila Farah, who supported the release of a terrorist that killed people in Jerusalem, and to serve as an advisory to SJB. Did not clear the encampments till 5 days after negotiations with the leaders broke down. Having said all that, what would you do different? And from the heart, how can we do better? Because I think, hey, listen, we all have concerns for everyone that goes to your school, both, if they're pro-Palestine, or if they're pro-Jewish. But how do we do better? How do we make Jewish kids feel safe to go to your school in the future?
Thank you for that question, and I appreciate the time to explain. We needed to do better. In our review, we understood that the length of time of that encampment created dangers. The numbers that you referenced in the end was a website that I released to show the community the dangers of what were happening in that space. We worked with, after the fact, we worked with the Jewish United Fund, with Chicago's Metro Hillel, and with many of our own Jewish faculty, staff, and students to understand how we could be better at creating a culture of compliance. This included creating a Jewish alumni group, a Jewish faculty staff alliance, working on time, place, and manner restrictions, figuring out that we need to do training using that data in that website to help people understand the modern interpretation of anti-Semitism. I admit thoroughly that we could do better, and I know that with our changes today, the results of a future encampment would be different. I would also end, if you give me the time, to say, since that moment, we have prevented overtakes of our campus by outside protesters, and we have a better sense of how to manage the balance between the protest and the safety and the welcomingness of our campus.
I truly respect and appreciate that response. And with that, I yield my time back to the chair.
I thank the gentleman. And I thank the panel for being here today. It's not whether we agree or disagree. It's the fact you're here. We appreciate that fact. It's been long. It's been arduous. It's been emotional. But it has been purposeful. And I'll get to that in my closing statement, but now I recognize the ranking member, my friend from Virginia, Mr. Scott, for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Comments have been made about whether or not this is just happening on campus. I'd like to enter into the record a press release from the ADL entitled U.S. Anti-Semitic Incidents Skyrocketed 360% in the aftermath of the attack on Israel, according to the latest ADL data. The release makes it clear that the majority of incidents that the ADL tracked, over 75%, happened in places other than college campuses. And also, I'd like to enter into the record an NBC News article, quote, January 6th rioter in, quote, Camp Auschwitz, unquote, hoodie, sentenced to 75 days in prison.
Without objection, the articles be
Thank you, Mr.
accepted.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for being here today. Today marks the 8th time the committee has held a hearing on anti-Semitism since October 7th, yet in all that time there's been no concrete action to actually protect any students from discrimination. Despite my multiple requests in that time, we've held no hearings on other forms of hate and discrimination, such as racism, Islamophobia, sexism in violation of Title IX, homophobia, or challenges of students with disabilities, all of which also pose major problems for students. So here we are again, complaining about the problem without offering real solutions, all the while the administration ignores due process and takes a chainsaw to the Office of Civil Rights, the very office responsible for investigating and addressing anti-Semitism, and putting the Community Relations Service at the Department of Justice also on the chopping block. That could be very helpful under these circumstances. Our priorities must lie with the students. The Trump administration's dismantling of the Office of Civil Rights and relentless attacks on institutions of higher learning will not make students' lives better, and students will pay the price of these cuts as schools struggle to function without federal funding. Just like in the last 7 hearings, I'll reiterate, physical violence or verbal harassment directed towards students should not be tolerated. And that said, college campuses have always been venues where individuals can debate difficult topics, or you might hear opinions which you disagree. It is vitally important to protect the sanctity of free speech and ensure that students do not suffer from discrimination. And that's a difficult balance to achieve, and that's why dedicated investigators are key to keeping campuses both free and safe. As Professor Cole said in his written testimony, we must tolerate offensive speech even when listeners experience it as deeply harmful, because giving government officials to determine whose views can be heard and whose should be silenced is a greater danger. No one should be discriminated against for who they are or how they worship, but ignoring due process and undermining the future of higher education will only make things worse, and it does not make Jewish students or anyone else on campus safer. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Let me state for the record, and I wish some of my Democrat colleagues were still here to hear me say this, I oppose discrimination of all kinds. Anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, discrimination of all kinds. I believe this committee will stand in that same light. But we're here today talking about anti-Semitism that has wrapped up multiple college and university campuses. And it's not just speech. I support free speech and always will. But free speech sometimes leads to the results of actions, and that is why we're here today and the 8 preceding times. When Jewish students cannot feel safe or have the ability to experience all that they expect on their university or college campus because of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism that blocks them, including faculty members, that will block them from having the meaningful experience that they paid for, at the very least, on their college campuses, or, even worse, being beat upon and injured as a result of what? Being a Jew. That's what we're talking about. That's what these hearings are for. They're not for free speech. We believe in that. But it's not too hard to tell when someone is injured and has a surgery because of that it's actions that are impacting freedom of education. I would suggest as well that the entities that have been responsible for civil rights issues on campus have failed. This has been developing OCR and others have not done their job. And I hope in the process of what this administration is doing, and we will be asking questions, we will have an entity that will actually function for all students, all faculty on campuses. Remember, this happened before this administration took office. We want it to end. So any suggestion that this is McCarthy-like is radically false. We are going to come to a solution. And thankfully, I can say as a result of these, we are seeing campuses around the United States taking action. And I thank the two campuses here today, DePaul and Cal Poly, for being able to demonstrate, at least in words, and of course we were looking for the policy and the outcomes, but you were able to tell us of mistakes and now what you're doing to remedy that. We wish you all well. For the good of this country, we need academic institutions that allow freedom of speech, but opportunity to experience it equally like all other students on campus, regardless of who you are, where you come from, your nationality, your gender, your faith. Sadly, we've seen the education of college students hindered far too often. And in this case, the hearing was on anti-Semitic disruptions, the blocking of access to buildings, the interruption of lectures, hateful, violent slogans that were put in place to incite violence, not just free speech. We've heard today of some modest changes made in recent months. We want them to be meaningful. But meaningful accountability means taking the risk of being unpopular and asking hard questions. Yes, it was passionate today. Sometimes it was emotional. I get that. But at least on this side of the aisle, we're taking it in a significant, meaningful, and purposeful way. And I would expect that a majority of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle take it purposeful as well. Hard decisions have to take place. We're wishing you success. We'll be watching. And I hope we'll be watching other universities and colleges around this country also saying, I don't want to be part of the problem. I'm going to take the example of what's gone on in our 8 hearings, and we'll work for change as well so that all students, those who come on a visa or those who have been blessed beyond measure to be born here as part of this great American experiment, that will all experience academic freedom and greater opportunity in the future. And so I thank you. I thank you for being here today. I thank you to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And being that there is no further action to be taken, the hearing is adjourned.